2, 1, for the first time in 20 years.
Stand by. All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another Sports Business and Broadcast Zoom meeting. My name's Dave Leno. I really appreciate everybody coming out and being a part of these meetings. I believe this is our 8th one, and it's a real privilege to bring some legendary voices and people in broadcast and sports media onto this platform for us to learn, share advice, and grow with each other during this time. A few things to think about as today's meeting is going on. One of the big themes that you're going to hear today from our guest, Kenny Albert, is working for different employers at the same time. And this may be a huge, huge talking point for a lot of you out there, especially after the pandemic ends and broadcast jobs and sports media jobs come back. And that's open and honest communication with your bosses and hiring managers, and being open with them about how you weigh the different jobs that you have, and if there are conflicts and overlaps of sports, how you are going to prioritize those jobs. Another theme for today's call is how to be seen but not heard. You've heard me talk about this a lot on these broadcast meetings, but that's gaining respect by sometimes not opening your mouth and just being there and allowing coaches, PR staffs, or any other front office members the opportunity to see that you actually show up, you ask the right questions at the right time, you dress professionally, all those things that will prepare yourself for longevity in this business. And then finally is being an ambassador of your team, station, or network. How properly you engage with fans, staff, and sponsors, not only on the air, but just as important, off the air as well. And don't make the job about yourself. Make it about the other people that are involved, the men and women behind the camera, or your analysts. Remember, you play a small part in the play, especially if you're a broadcaster. Today, ladies and gentlemen, on the agenda, we'll have an interview, a brief one between myself and Kenny Albert. Following that, we'll have some Q&A time with Kenny and you. After Kenny is done and has to go, we'll review the interview, and then there's some updates on how sports is going to come back, which is certainly the news is changing seemingly every minute. So we'll get your thoughts on how those businesses are going to resume. But for now, and you heard a little preview of this a moment ago when I was loading this, here's a little vignette of some of Kenny's legendary calls.
3, 2, 1, for the first time in 20 years, the New York Rangers were headed to the Stanley Cup Finals. Mayfield throws and it's picked up on the deflection. Barry and Kennedy inside the 10 of the 5 into the end zone. Touchdown. Rush feed Mooney to keep Canada's hopes alive. She is stopped. The United States wins gold in PMJ. 3.
Love that call, Kenny. Love that call. Ladies and gentlemen, today I am pleased to welcome one of the most versatile voices on the national stage in Kenny Albert. I know a lot of you know him, follow his work, see him on TV all the time. Among the many opportunities that he's been blessed to be part of for a number of years, here they are on your screen right now. A play-by-play announcer with Fox Sports. He's been with Fox since their inception in 1994. A lot of you, upon registering, asked me questions for Kenny about how he got to Fox, and I know he's going to talk about that journey since 2017. He's been paired with Rondé Barber. A lot of you know him with the pairing of Moose and Goose, Darryl Johnston and Tony Siragusa for a number of years. So we'll get into his days with Fox and the NFL. Also, the proud radio voice of the New York Rangers for 24 years, calling the play-by-play on ESPN 98.7 with former Rangers captain Dave Maloney. As we also know, calls NHL games on NBC and NBCSN as well, including the Stanley Cup Finals on Westwood One Radio. You heard the last call from Pyeongchang, called Hockey at the Olympics, has done the Winter Olympics for a number of years on the hockey side, also has done the Summer Olympics with track and field. We see Kenny a lot with his New York roots on MSG networks as well. Does about 20 to 25 games every year with the New York Knicks, with Clyde Walt Frazier, and we love that Kenny is with us today to talk about that MSG network experience. Also is on there as well with his New York Rangers coverage, and he has done boxing as well with the Premier Boxing Champions Series. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to have Kenny Albert on the call with us today. Kenny, first and foremost, thank you so much for making this a part of your day. How are you and your family doing during this time?
Well, Dave, first of all, thanks for having me. It's an honor to join you guys today. We're doing very well. Hope everybody out there is doing well, healthy, staying safe as well. And I really appreciate the kind introduction.
You're welcome. When the sports world stopped, Kenny, I heard a recent interview that you gave that you were in Denver, I believe, calling a Rangers game. One of your daughters was in Sydney, Australia. So we all know that the Rudy Gobert story and also Tom Hanks contracting this virus. But what was that moment like when you first got the word that the NBA was stopping? And have you seen anything like this in your career? I know you were part of some work stoppages in the various broadcasts and leagues that you've been a part of, but what were the first few things going through your mind when you heard the news broke about COVID-19?
Well, it was kind of a surreal night. It was March 11th, Wednesday, March 11th, just over 2 months ago. And I'm sure everybody on here remembers where they were, what they were doing when they heard the news, first about Rudy Gobert and then about the NBA postponing the season. The Tom Hanks news as well, when he and his wife, Rita, announced that they both had the coronavirus. I was in the broadcast booth in Denver, getting set to do that Rangers Avalanche game with Dave Maloney. And it was an 8 o'clock start Mountain Time, 10 o'clock Eastern. And over the past couple of days prior to that, obviously we were all following what was going on with COVID-19 for a couple of months. And then when the Rangers traveled to Dallas to play a game against the Stars on the 10th, that's when things started to change. That morning, we were not allowed in the locker room, for example, following the morning skate. We had to conduct interviews outside the locker room. They did not allow any of the media into the Rangers or the Dallas Stars locker room. For coach interviews, they held a press conference. Normally, we would be standing next to the coach holding a recording device or an iPhone microphone basically inches away from his face, but we couldn't do that. Same thing the next day in Denver. Locker rooms closed after the morning skate. So some rumors started to circulate about what was going to happen. Would they have to play any games without fans? I think the San Jose Sharks, there was some speculation because of the announcement from their county up in Northern California about gatherings involving more than 1,000 people. So we were all wondering what was going to happen. So fast forward to about 7 o'clock Mountain Time on March 11th, I'm up in the broadcast booth and we have a television monitor in front of us, and I see the news come across about the Rudy Gobert situation. About 5 minutes later, I'm looking at my iPad and there's an announcement from the NBA about the postponement of the season. Now, just to give some background, I was in Denver, but I was scheduled to fly the next morning to Miami to work a Knicks Heat broadcast on Friday night, and then go back to Arizona to meet the Rangers for a game on Saturday. So as soon as the NBA announced the cancellation, I figured, well, I guess I'm not going to Miami now. The only problem was, if I were going to fly with the Rangers to Arizona, my suitcase was back at the hotel. I didn't have my stuff with me because I was scheduled to stay over. So somebody was nice enough from our crew to go back and get my suitcase, pack up the bag, bring it to the arena during the first period. As it turns out, the Rangers then decided to stay over in Denver and not fly to Arizona that night because the NHL owners and board of governors scheduled a conference call for the next day. So we all stay over. The NHL, of course, announces that they were pausing the season at that point as well. So got on the plane with the Rangers and our broadcast group, and instead of flying to Arizona, we flew back to New York, landed in the late afternoon on March 12th, had dinner at home that night, and last night was dinner number 62 consecutively at my kitchen table.
Yeah, certainly a turbulent series of events, and thank you for sharing that. A lot of the participants on here asked me upon registering to redirect it to you is, as you're gathering news that the NHL may be coming back, the NBA, of course, the NFL in the next coming months, if they will play their season on time, how do you expect your job to change or be altered? Do you see yourself carrying your own headset, number one? Do you see yourself and bringing that to your respective venues? Do you see yourself calling the games more from the studio, which I'm sure you have experience doing, or does Fox or NBC or among the networks that you work with, do they pump in crowd noise like you would see on a sitcom show? How do you foresee all these changes to the business in the coming weeks and months ahead?
Well, they're all great questions, and there's so much unknown out there right now. I'm probably reading and listening to the same thing that you all are every day about the potential return and what the various leagues might do. When I left on that trip for Dallas on March 9th, my wife actually packed me up a Ziploc with some Purell and some Lysol wipes, etc. And for the first time in my life, I wiped down the headset in Dallas prior to the game on March 10th. And when we showed up in the booth in Denver the next day, the engineer actually told Dave and I wiped down the headsets for you. So that's something that I would never normally do. I'm not really a germaphobe. I'm on planes all the time, over 100 plane trips a year, and knock on wood, I hardly ever get sick. In 25 years, 30 years, I've missed one game due to laryngitis, sore throat. That was a Rangers radio broadcast down in Washington over 20 years ago. So I'm very fortunate in that respect. But as far as when we return, great questions. I would think that there might be initially some broadcast done out of a studio. To me personally, one of the great things about doing play-by-play is actually being at the game and having the crowd noise, pumped into your headset. I always keep my volume really loud, the effects, and I'm sure, my hearing in about 15 or 20 years won't be as good as it is now. But, let's hope that at some point we're all back to doing things as we normally have for the last, 30 years in my case. But I wouldn't be surprised if we ease into it. And at least at the beginning, a lot of us are doing games off a television monitor out of a studio.
I know the Olympics does a lot of that, and a lot of networks like Big Ten Network, Fox, I think, has some facilities in Charlotte, also Los Angeles, and others that I've been a part of, including my MLS job, where all our road games are done from 6 ABC studios in Philadelphia. So that could definitely be a theme for a lot of you on here, regardless of your level. You may be doing games away from your actual venue. So Kenny, let's go briefly into your background before we go to the Q&A part. You're a native of Sands Point, New York, and I read a story that around 5 years old, your parents gifted you with the tape recorder, and of course we know your family's history in broadcast, and we can go into that in a little bit more detail. But first, centering on you, when you had that tape recorder, I'm wondering what type of games were you broadcasting? Were you broadcasting your father's Knicks and Rangers games, and who were you sharing those tapes with?
Hopefully not too many people. I wouldn't want to listen back these days. I do have some of them in a box somewhere. But, as you alluded to, obviously I grew up around sportscasting with my father and my two uncles. And I often joke that during family occasions, birthdays, holidays, when my uncles Steve and Al came to the house as well, that was like the first all sports radio station. I would sit around listening to their stories and just gather information via osmosis. And it was great times just listening, to the stories about various players and teams and coaches and their travels. But I was gifted that toy tape recorder at the age of 5. And I was never told, you have to do this, you have to practice play-by-play, you have to go into sportscasting. It was, never anything like that. But it was something that I just loved doing right from the start, being around it, going to games at Madison Square Garden, going to the WNBC studios at 30 Rock, basically for my entire childhood. It's really all I ever wanted to do. I did a lot of sports writing as well in middle school and high school, a little bit in college. Did more work at the college radio station than newspaper, but I did some writing as well. I would bring that tape recorder to games when I became old enough at Madison Square Garden, Shea Stadium. But prior to that, probably from the age of 5 until 12, it was in my bedroom on Long Island, where I lived for my entire childhood. I now live in New Jersey, where I've been for 20 years. I spent 5 years in Maryland in the D.C. area. After college, 4 years in Manhattan, and now 20 years in Northern Jersey. But growing up on Long Island, I had my bedroom set up like a radio or TV studio. I had the desk and then the bed in the middle and the TV on the other side. And I had all these notebooks, and I would write out rosters and statistics, and a lot of it was Knicks and Rangers and NFL games and baseball games, Yankee games, Met games, and I would broadcast games into the tape recorder in my bedroom, once in a while in the basement. And my first really big break came in January of 1984. I was about to turn 16 years old. I was in high school at Paul D. Schreiber High School in Port Washington, Long Island, 10th grade. And for the previous year or two, I wrote for the town paper, even before I started high school. And then I was writing for the high school paper, the Schreiber Times. So I knew a lot of the coaches and players, and I was at all the football games, basketball games, boys and girls, baseball games, lacrosse, soccer, covering for the school newspaper. In January of 84, the athletic director at my school tells me that a small cable station, Cox Cable of Great Neck, is coming in tomorrow to film a girls' basketball game. And he introduced me to the producer prior to the game, and their plan was to go with 2 cameras. They had a little production van outside the gym, and that was it. They were going to film this game with natural sound, no announcers. I volunteered. So they clipped a microphone onto my shirt. I sat 3 rows behind the home team bench. People around me probably thought I was crazy talking to myself if they didn't see the microphone that was clipped on. And I broadcasted this Schreiber High School girls basketball game. And after the game, I got the phone number. I got the business card of the producer, Roy Menton, the late Roy Menton. Great guy, passed away a couple of years ago, and I kept in touch with him for many, many years. And he hired me the next day. There was no pay. I didn't care, just wanted the experience. It was so much fun. And for my 3 years in high school, 2.5 remaining years, I broadcasted over 100 games, high school basketball, baseball, soccer, lacrosse, football, all over Long Island, Nassau County, some games in Suffolk County. We did college games. I did play-by-play for the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, a Division III school, during my high school years. We did all their football home games, basketball home games, and it was so much fun. I would bring friends along with me as the color commentator. And back then, much different than it is now, these days there are so many sportscasting camps every summer, and I've been real fortunate to be asked to speak at a number of them every year for the last 10 or 15 years. Back then, none of that was going on. So I felt like I had a 3-year head start on anybody else my age who wanted to do play-by-play, who would not have the opportunity until their freshman year at college. I was doing it in 10th grade, thanks to Cox Cable, just by luck showing up at my high school one day.
I love that story with Cox Cable out on Great Neck, where you had the lapel mic on you and you're doing the women's basketball game. And I think that's a great story for a lot of the men and women on this call, that you were willing to do all that work. And yes, you were young, but you were willing to do it for free to gain experience. And oftentimes I'll hear, some people will message me and say, I'm not making a lot of money. I don't know if I could do this. And they're not relishing the journey, Kenny. They're not trying to work their way up, go from small, medium to big. A lot of people think there should be instant gratification in this business because let's face it, sometimes there are cases where a kid coming out of a certain school at 22, 23 gets this hot job with a network or team, but there's others that it takes them 20 years to achieve their dreams. So it's great to hear from a guy so accomplished in yourself. And yes, that was at a young age, but you're willing to put in the time, effort, and all that work in for no pay. I think that's a great lesson for all of us to learn.
And then if you fast forward 4 years, I don't want to totally skip over the college days. I guess we can get back to that. But did broadcasting at NYU. We did the men's and women's basketball games. But the next really big opportunity was after college, sent out tapes to numerous minor league hockey teams. Doing hockey on the radio was really my goal. That was my dream at that point, and was real fortunate to get hired by a team in the American Hockey League, the Baltimore Skipjacks. They were the AAA affiliate, to use baseball terms, of the Washington Capitals. And this job not only encompassed doing the radio play-by-play, but working in the team office throughout the summer, throughout the season, doing public relations, marketing, sales, which I wasn't a big fan of. I think I made 3 sales the entire summer. I would pick up players at the airport. I would wait in a coach's house for the cable guy. Really whatever it took, whatever they needed the broadcaster to do, I would do. And obviously the radio play-by-play was the best part of it. But looking back, I would not trade in those 2 years, the 90-91 season and the 91-92 season, for anything. So many great memories, still good friends with some of the players, coaches, front office staff from that Skipjacks team. And we took bus rides, 4 hours, 5 hours, 10 hours from Baltimore up to Portland, Maine for a road game. But looking back, if you throw out a generic season, let's say the 2002 football season or the 02-03 NHL season, I might not remember too many specifics about that year. But if you ask me about the 1991, 90-91 or 91-92 Baltimore Skipjacks, I can think back and tell you about so many different anecdotes like it was yesterday.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And at NYU, I know at WNYU Radio, you did basketball, and you were also a high school hockey player, club hockey player. I loved hearing the stories about you at the Sky Rink on the 16th floor, and playing some games there and seeing that flyer. And I heard the tidbit in a recent interview that you had the first goal in NYU club hockey history.
I did. I didn't score too many. I was probably a third-line winger for most of my hockey career. Did play club hockey in high school. It was a lot of fun. And then when I went off to college, I figured that was it. I would play in pickup games, but never again on any official established team. And my freshman year in college, I'm walking through one of the buildings at NYU, and there's a flyer up on the wall. Another student came up with the idea to start a club hockey team. He was a junior at the time, Matt Nathis, and by total coincidence, my freshman year, Matt started a club hockey team at NYU. So I played club hockey for 4 years. Many of our games were at Sky Rink on the 16th floor, 33rd between 9th and 10th in Manhattan. We played some games in Bayonne, New Jersey, and traveled all over the tri-state area. We were not an official school team. We were a club team. We did get some money from NYU. They allowed us to use their athletic department vans. So we would all pile in with the hockey equipment. That smelled really good to go to some of the away games. But it was a lot of fun. And on a December 1986 late night, somehow I did score the first goal in NYU hockey history against the College of Staten Island. And also played against, and I came to learn this about 5 years ago, John Cooper, the head coach of the Tampa Bay Lightning, who attended Hofstra University and was a really good lacrosse player, also played club hockey at Hofstra, and we actually played against each other back in the late 80s somewhere on Long Island.
That's great. And I remember hearing a story about how you landed that Skipjacks job. You were filling in on some play-by-play games of the Islanders. You also did pre and post. I believe a producer hired you because I think the studio was a couple blocks from maybe your dorm or from the NYU campus. And you sent the tape from you doing an Islanders at Winnipeg game into the AHL team, the Skipjacks, landing that job. And I think that's a great learning lesson for the men and women on here, that maybe if they're having a hard time finding work, getting games, if they can develop a relationship to make a mock broadcast and send that out, it's better than nothing, right?
Right, absolutely. And one of the benefits to going to college in New York was being able to land certain internships and jobs during college. And by having the opportunity to fill in on that Islanders game in December of '89, that was actually the tape that I sent to the Skipjacks. I had heard the job was open. But one thing that I tell high school students when I speak to groups similar to this, Dave, and to the sportscasting camps in the summer, there are so many more opportunities out there now for kids heading into college, broadcasting-wise. At WNYU, one of the benefits to going to NYU and not to a, quote, bigger sportscasting type school first of all, I wanted to be around the NHL. I didn't want to not be around hockey for 4 years. So I was looking at NHL cities in Boston and Washington, and finally settled in NYU. But I'd also heard that at some of the other larger broadcasting schools, and NYU is a huge school, over 40,000 students, but there were not that many interested in sportscasting, fortunately for myself and my friends at the time. But, I'd heard that at some of these other schools, you might not get on the air until your junior or senior year. You might have opportunities behind the scenes, but not actually on the air. At NYU, there were 6 of us who were interested in sportscasting. So one of us would do play-by-play every game. One would be the color analyst. One would be the statistician. One would be the engineer. Another would be the producer back at the station. And we got to do everything right from the start. However, we did have to battle for airtime. WNYU-FM was a big music station at the time, and they had a number of DJs who went on to much bigger and better. Tabitha Soren, who was one of the early VJs on MTV, was working on the music side at WNYU at the time. And we had a battle with them for the airtime whenever a basketball game was going to be played. And we wound up getting most of the games on the air. But these days, there's something called the internet that did not exist when I was in college. And most colleges, as far as I know, with big Division I sports teams, even Division III, you have the opportunity to broadcast games on the internet. So no matter what the sport is, even if it's not basketball, football, baseball, if it's soccer, lacrosse, volleyball, sports that might not have gotten airtime, back in the 80s and 90s before the internet existed, now you can do just about any game in any sport. And conferences such as the ACC and the Big Ten, their networks will come in to do certain games, and they hire students to work both on the air and behind the scenes. So in a way, I wish I was going to college now when we didn't have to fight for the airtime and there were so many more opportunities out there to be able to broadcast the games in so many different sports.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of college broadcasters on here that get to do ESPN Plus games or BTN Student U. So they're creating, in essence, a TV tape that a lot of people in the beginning parts of their careers were only coming out with radio content, and now had to eventually get a break to be on TV.
I've noticed that when I'm sent tapes by students to listen to, each year it's more and more TV calls because they're able to get the experience. Back again when I was growing up in the 80s and early 90s, you didn't really have that opportunity. So most of the audition tapes were radio calls.
I want to touch on your springboard, how you got in with some of the big players that you're at right now. And I know this job was a big player for you at the time. And I believe it was 1992 from that skipjacks job into the home team sports in DC, where you were calling Capitals games on television. That led you to your versatility in all these different sports, getting on TV on other games like Orioles games for baseball, football, basketball, which led you to catching the eye of Fox. So could you touch on it, how those opportunities help cultivate relationships for you to finally get that call in '94 at Fox when they were hiring some big-time announcers like Pat Summerall, but also bringing on guys like yourself, Tom Brenneman, Joe Buck, Kevin Harlan, who's now at CBS, of course, was at Fox in '94. So how did that start from your DC roots into Fox at '94?
So one of the big benefits during my days in Baltimore, they were the affiliate of the Washington Capitals. So Capitals folks were always around, coming to our games, coming to practices. So I got to know some of the members of the organization. And Bill Brown, who was the executive producer at Home Team Sports at the time, he and Jody Shapiro ran the network. And I had first met Bill in 1990. Somehow we made a connection and had lunch. And they actually flew me down, and I did an audition back in 1990 for Home Team Sports and the Washington Capitals, still in college at the time. Did not get the job, wasn't ready for the job at that point, but it was great just to be in the mix and audition for it. But now I get the skipjacks job, and I wind up running into Bill and Jody and some of the others from Home Team Sports and kept in touch with them during those 2 years. We also did a couple of skipjack games on TV. And I would move over from the radio booth, and these games were on delayed tape, 2 or 3 a season. And we made a deal for Home Team Sports to air those games. So they had a chance to see some of my work at the time. And they decided in the spring of '92 to split their home and away broadcasts. Home Team Sports did the home games, and an over-the-air station, Channel 20, did the away games, and HTS made the decision to have their own set of announcers. So I was offered the job in '92, which was just a tremendous opportunity to begin working NHL games at such a young age. And during my 3 years at Home Team Sports, they would also ask me to fill in on a couple of Washington Bullets NBA games, Orioles baseball games, 2 or 3 or 4 a year. But it was just tremendous experience, and I had done some of those sports, obviously, in college and with Cox Cable, so I had a little bit of experience. So that helped lead to the variety by not just doing hockey and working my way over into some of those other sports at the time. They also did ACC conference sports, the CAA. I got to do the CAA tournament a couple of times, and there was you showed some memorable calls, Dave, right at the beginning. Probably the first big call was a James Madison basketball game. A player by the name of Kent Kaluko hit a game-winning shot. I think it was a three-pointer from the corner. Lefty Drizel, the old Maryland coach, was the James Madison coach at the time. And this shot put James Madison into the NCAA tournament. So when I think back, that was probably the first the situation that I was in to make a call like that. Because of the relationship with Home Team Sports, I got to do not only hockey, basketball, baseball, but would fill in on some soccer and lacrosse games, and even did college wrestling once. I really had no idea what I was doing, but worked that event down at the University of North Carolina. Now, late in '93 was when Rupert Murdoch and Fox wrestled the NFC football rights away from CBS, who had done the NFC for like 35, 37 years at that time. And Bill Brown, who was the executive producer at HTS, had a relationship with Ed Gorin, who had become the executive producer at Fox. They had worked together at CBS prior to that. And there was another executive at Home Team Sports, Jody Shapiro, who I mentioned. He knew a fellow by the name of George Krieger, who was one of the executives at Fox in late '93, early '94. And the story that I had heard later on was that George's kids were lacrosse players, and he had asked Jody Shapiro for some lacrosse tapes. You know, DVR didn't exist at the time, and it was hard to sometimes acquire videos of games that had been played. And apparently one of the tapes that I had sent, or that Jody had sent to George Krieger, was a lacrosse game that I had worked. So now you had one of the executives at Fox watching this lacrosse tape. Another executive at Fox had a relationship with Bill Brown. And that led to an audition in March or April of '94. Fox had made the decision to go with a lot of the veteran announcers from CBS, Pat Summerall and John Madden, Dick Stockton and Matt Millen as their top two crews. But they decided to hire some younger broadcasters. And we were really all in the right place at the perfect time. If Fox doesn't get the rights to the NFC at that point, none of us are ever doing NFL football. I was 26 at the time. Joe Buck was 25. If I'm not mistaken, Tom Brenneman was 28 or 29. Kevin Harlan was a couple of years older than me. And they hired the four of us as play-by-play announcers to do the NFL on Fox. And I'm very proud to say that three of us are still there 26 years later. Kevin Harlan's had a great career with CBS and Turner since leaving Fox. So that was obviously huge for all of us. The next year, Fox acquired the rights to the NHL. So I worked NHL on Fox games for 5 years. Fox acquired the rights to Major League Baseball. So I started doing baseball with Fox on the cable side in '97, and then on the network side around 2000 or 2001. And also in '95, had to make a very tough decision when I was offered a job in New York to do the Rangers on the radio. I loved life down in Washington. It was a great place to live. I owed so much to the bosses at Home Team Sports. I really enjoyed doing the Capitals games on TV and the other variety. And it was really a hard decision. In the long run, it was the right decision, but it was tough for a couple of days. But did decide to return home, and have been at MSG Network now for 25 years doing Rangers hockey on the radio, Knicks basketball about 20 games a year on the TV side for the last 10 years or so, and added NBC hockey as well around 10 years ago. Had done the Olympics for NBC, as Dave mentioned earlier, starting in 2002. That was another crazy story. Mike Emmerich, the great Doc Emmerich, and Gary Thorne were the two hockey announcers that NBC hired to go to Salt Lake in '02. About a week before the start of the Olympics, Mike Emmerich had to pull out due to a family situation. And I got the call out of the blue, and here we are, and I've worked 6 Olympics for NBC. If Mike had not had to pull out of those Salt Lake Olympics, I might not have done any Olympics to this point. So some of it's luck, a lot of it's being in the right place at the right time, and hard to believe it's been 30 years since that first job with the Baltimore Skipjacks.
Thank you for sharing, your career and how you landed those big time jobs, which you still are in now, because a lot of us would dream about 1 or 2 of those opportunities to be in your shoes. So it's awesome that you come on here and tell us that story. I want to stop myself here because I do want to get to the question and answer. I have a lot more questions about your background, but I want the folks on here to interact with you. So Kenny, if it's okay, I'll turn it over to them, and we'll go for a little bit here, guys. So Kenny has time for us. So we'll go to Colin Cosell, another famous family on here. Colin, I'm going to unmute you and say hello to Kenny.
Kenny, great to see you again, my friend. How are you?
Good to see you, Colin. I've met Colin a couple of times. He does a great job at Citi Field, and I enjoyed watching his grandfather last week when MSG Network replayed the Knicks winning the championship back in May of 1970.
Yeah, it was funny. I didn't realize that was happening until my phone just blew up, and they said you need to turn on MSG right now, because I had never actually seen that footage. We just have the pictures from it. So to see Howard and his toupee kind of battling champagne was definitely thoroughly entertaining for the whole family. So,
well, it was a lot of fun to watch, and I did actually speak for a couple of minutes on the phone that day with Walt Clyde Frazier, who I have the pleasure of working with on the Knicks telecast, and he had the game of his life that night, 36 points, 17 assists, 9 rebounds, and it was a lot of fun to watch his interview with your grandfather as well, 50 years prior.
And I watched that clip afterwards, and it was just kind of funny to see 2 men who, with their control of the English language, of course, Walt Clyde with more of a poetic approach to it than my grandfather, but watching them actually go face to face was something that was kind of very, very surreal for me. But anyway, thank you so much for taking time to talk to everyone. Myself, obviously, as a PA announcer for the New York Mets, I love what I do, but I've been involved in sports broadcasting for about 10 years now. Started with the MSG Network, or MSG Varsity Network, I should say, and Verizon Files One Sports on the high school level. I've only done television. I started out with color commentary because I was a hockey player, and I always wanted to do play-by-play. And finally was afforded that opportunity and had an absolute blast with it, and got to cover some of the top schools in New Jersey. They're lightning fast. And I know that on the NHL level, it's even faster. When you're covering it on TV, you're allowed a certain amount of breathing room. I mean, it's high intensity, but on the radio, you have to paint a picture. My question to you is, you are on top of it, because I hold in the highest regard when it comes to hockey, Doc Emmerich with TV play-by-play, and you for radio play-by-play, because you guys paint a picture so mellifluously and meticulously well. How do you prepare for that, and how are you able to stay on top of all the action, painting that picture and not stumbling over yourself?
Well, I appreciate the question, Colin. And I've been very fortunate to work so many different sports, and there's nothing like 1 o'clock on a Sunday kickoff during NFL season, or a baseball playoff game. But to me, hockey on the radio might be the purest form of sports broadcasting. The puck's in action for the entire time. And, baseball, the ball's only in action for 7 to 12 minutes over the course of the entire game. There's so much time to fill in between pitches. Football's the most rhythmic. It's one play, and then it's 15 or 20 seconds. Then it's another play, 15 or 20 seconds. Basketball is similar to hockey, but slower. The ball's in play for the entire 48-minute game, but there are more stoppages than hockey. It's a lot slower when players bring the ball up court, for example, or they're passing it around. Hockey, it's lightning quick. It's 60 minutes. There are stoppages, obviously, for goals, penalties, saves by the goaltender when the puck goes out of play. But I have had comments made to me in the past that I sound the most excited when I'm doing hockey on the radio. I think that's a function of the sport and the speed of the sport, because you have to keep up with it. And in the playoffs, the level rises even more so. And I've been very lucky to do a lot of big playoff games on TV as well, and those are so exciting. to work, but you certainly do pull back on TV as far as the play-by-play. You don't have to describe as much. You don't have to give the time and the score as often because the viewers can see it. On the radio, it's almost every pass. Every time a player has the puck, you're describing something. Is he at the left point, the right point, the red line, the blue line, the near corner, the far corner, the top of the crease? There are so many different phrases, and Mike Emmerich's the master of that with all of the phrases and words that he weaves in throughout a telecast. But I think the other part of it, Colin, is it's what I've been doing the longest. I've done hockey on the radio now for most of the last 30 years, aside from the 3 years in Washington when it was only TV. The Skipjacks were radio for those 2 seasons, and then 24 seasons now with the Rangers on the radio side. So I've done it the longest. All of the Olympic hockey that I've done has been on the TV side. So it's fun to go back and forth. I enjoy, there are so many positive aspects of both radio and television. Now, one positive as far as radio in the NHL is you go as far as your team goes in the playoffs. The local TV crews stop after the first round. So working with Dave Maloney on some of the Rangers' deep playoff runs in 2014 when they went to the Stanley Cup final, and 2015 when they went to Game 7 of the Eastern Conference final. Those are some of the great memories when I look back. Somebody posted on Twitter today, I think today is the 5th anniversary of Derek Stepan's big Game 7 overtime goal to beat Washington in 2015 to get to that Eastern Conference final. So there's just something special about hockey on the radio, and I think a lot of it just has to do with the speed of the game. It's similar to the difference between sitting in the first 10 rows at a hockey game or sitting all the way up in the broadcast booth in so many of the arenas where we work from, where the game looks like it's moving so slow. I worked the Stadium Series, the outdoor game, just over 2 months ago. Seems like a year ago now, but in Colorado Springs between the Avalanche and the Kings. I worked out at NBC. Our broadcast location was right up against the glass, which is tough from a play-by-play standpoint, but I couldn't believe how fast things were moving that day because I'm so used to being all the way upstairs in most of the arenas.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time. And as always, you're one of the best, and I think, Don LaGreca does a phenomenal job filling in when you're not there, but there's nothing quite like Kenny Albert. So thank you for what you do, and thank you for taking time out today.
Well, Donnie's great. He does our pre and post game and the intermissions when I'm there, and then he does the play-by-play when I'm not. Does a terrific job. So I'm sure he would appreciate the kind words, Colin, as I do as well. And hopefully at some point in the near future, we get to hear your voice over the public address at Citi Field once again soon.
I hope to see you there.
Thanks, Colin. Appreciate that. Here's Kenny. Here's Lucas. Lucas, go ahead and unmute your mic. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Kenny. Lucas Weiss here. I'm from Toronto, Canada. I'm a graduate sports journalism student here. Very passionate about sports journalism, play-by-play broadcasting. I've grown up listening to you, Doc Emmerich, and here in Canada, Bob Cole and Jim Houston call hockey games. But my question for you is preparing for the big call. And I want to use the example of a game that you called the 2015 Game 5 ALDS Jays Rangers. And that your call of Bautista's home run, Bautista with a drive, deep left field, no doubt about it. And I'm just sort of curious, as a broadcaster, do you prepare for those calls, beforehand or like in the moment? Like, how can you think split second what to say in such a big moment?
Well, first of all, thanks for checking in, Lucas. Always love working games in Toronto. And the game you mentioned, Game 5 of the American League Division Series in 2015 is probably one of the games that I get asked about the most often, the crazy 7th inning, the Bautista home run. Love working Leafs games. I've worked some Raptors, Knicks games as well. So it's a great city, and hopefully I'll get back there at some point in the near future. And also love Jim Houston and Bob Cole and some of the others that you mentioned, Joe Bowen and Jim Ralph, who do the Leafs broadcast as well, among my favorite guys to chat with and visit with. As far as prepared calls, not usually. I don't usually script out calls that might come up during the course of a game, such as a goal or a home run. That Bautista call was not scripted. It's just something that came to my mind at that moment. I may have used the no doubt about it on a couple of home runs in the past, but wasn't specifically thinking about using it in that game. The only times that I probably write something out is for an end of game situation, perhaps in a playoff series or even at the Olympics. And I remember when the Vegas Golden Knights made it to the Stanley Cup final in 2018. I was doing the Western Conference final on TV, and I had something prepared. They were up 3-1 over Winnipeg in the series. And I think I figured out the number of days since they had played their first game in franchise history. And I incorporated that into the call as they were headed to the Stanley Cup final. When the St. Louis Blues won last year, I was working the Stanley Cup final on Westwood One. And I think during the third period, it was a game 7, and it was a close game until they scored a couple of goals late. I think at some point during the third period, I scribbled down the phrase "from worst to first," because the Blues had been in last place in the entire league in early January, and they wound up winning the Stanley Cup in June. So my call on Westwood One as that game, as the time wound down in Boston, was something to the effect of "from worst to first, the St. Louis Blues, for the first time in franchise history, are the Stanley Cup champions," with a little more excitement in my voice than now, sitting in a room by myself. So some of those end of game, end of series calls, I might jot down a couple of words, but usually not when it's a play that develops or happens during the course of the game.
Thank you so much, Kenny, for taking the time and for answering my question. All the best and stay safe.
Thanks, Lucas. You too. Good luck.
All right, Kenny, here's Matt Trust, works with the AHL Hershey Bears. Sure you've been to Chocolate Town a few times or two. Hey, Matt.
Hey, thanks so much for taking the time to do this. Kenny, really great pleasure to have you. Dave, thanks again for setting all this up. So I want to ask you about just the grind. And it's a grind when you're riding on the bus in the American Hockey League with the Baltimore Skipjacks for a couple seasons. But it's also a different type of grind when you're calling 4 major sports in 4 different nights. Is there one that you prefer over the other? Is there one that is a bit more difficult on you? I want to hear your perspective on that.
Well, Matt, first of all, before I get to your question, a quick anecdote. So the Hershey Bears were our closest rival when I was working in Baltimore, up I-83 to I-81, if I remember correctly. It was about a 90-minute drive, either in my car or on the team bus. And we played the Bears 14 times per season, 7 home, 7 away, because they were the closest rival to the Skipjacks. And my first ever game, I had filled in on a couple of the Islander games, as I mentioned, but my first game as a full-time professional broadcaster was October 6th, 1990, at the original Hershey Park Arena. And I was so excited. I was working in the team office for 2.5 months. Couldn't wait for the first game to finally be played. I'm sitting in the office in July and August and September. Finally, the first game is here, up in Hershey. And Gene Ubriaco, who had been the coach of the Pittsburgh Penguins the year before, had coached in Baltimore with the Skipjacks prior to that. He had actually volunteered to be my color analyst for some of the home games. He was living back in Baltimore, wasn't coaching. So he actually came up to Hershey for that game. And Matt, I'm sure you're too young to remember the old arena, but the broadcast booth was right in the middle of the stands, about 15 rows up. It was great. Tremendous view of the ice, but you were really cramped. There was barely room for one person, let alone 2. So Gene and I squeeze into the broadcast booth. You're in the stands. The whole building smells like chocolate. The whole city smells like chocolate. And, at that level, you are your own engineer. There's no technician. So I had to set up this antiquated equipment that the Skipjacks had, probably from the 1970s, and plug into a phone jack underneath the desk in the broadcast booth. So we get everything set up. We're on the air. And I had a phone plugged into a second line. That was our emergency phone, just in case anything went wrong and the station had to contact us. During the middle of the second period, the press box was right in front of the broadcast booth. I got handed up a note. Call your station. You're off the air. You've been off for 5 minutes. This is my first game. So at this point, I think I'm about to get fired. I'll never make it to game number 2. Turns out either Gene or I, one of us, had accidentally kicked out the phone jack from underneath the desk, and the station tried to call us on the backup line, but we have headsets on and it's so loud we couldn't hear the phone ring. So we got everything plugged back in and got back on the air, and it was always great. They always had good hot dogs in the press room in Hershey back in the day. So great memories of Hershey Park Arena. But to get to your question, Matt, I'm sure at times it did feel like a grind when I was on if we had a Friday night home game in Baltimore and then had a 4-hour bus ride up to Utica, New York, or a 6-hour ride to Springfield, Massachusetts, and you get to the motel room at 4 or 5 in the morning and the team would play the next day and then get back on the bus that night to go back home. But great memories when I think back. When I fly with the Rangers or the Knicks, I'm amazed sometimes if we get into a city, if they play a game the night before and we travel and get into the city at 3 or 4 in the morning, get to the hotel, I know how tired I can be at times. I can't believe that these athletes have the ability to then get on the ice or get on the court the next night like they slept for 12 hours, which certainly is not the case. So I'm amazed at the grind that they go through. For us as broadcasters, sometimes, and I'll never be one to complain about it because I never feel like I'm going to work a day in my life. There's a lot of travel and a lot of prep that goes into it. But to me, the work is all fun. The preparation I love almost as much as the games. Once in a while, you're not that thrilled with a 6 a.m. flight or, a 5 or 6 hour flight across country. I happen to not mind those because I get a lot of work done on the long flights. But, you can get tired. It can turn into a grind. And I have had periods in October, as you mentioned, where I might have 4 different sports within the course of 7 or 8 days during NFL season, baseball playoffs, NHL regular season. There might be a basketball preseason game thrown in there as well. But I often do remind myself how lucky I am to be doing this. We could be doing things that we hate, to be frank. And during those periods in October and during normally this time, April, May, during the hockey playoffs, when I might be going back and forth between 2 or 3 different series for a stretch of 13 or 14 straight days, I think the adrenaline also helps carry you as well during those times. And during the playoffs, and those of you who have ever worked a playoff series in any sport would probably agree, the work actually gets easier and you have less prep in the playoffs if you're covering one series, because once you do the preparation for the first game, you're there at every practice, the coach press conferences, every subsequent game. So there's actually not as much prep during those times because you're living it if you're at that entire series. So thanks for the question, Matt. Good luck in Hershey. And I have a lot of memories of those trips up I-83 from 1990 through 1992. The Hershey Bears had a pretty good team back then.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kenny. We still use Hershey Park Arena occasionally as a practice facility whenever Giants Center has a concert or a trade show or what have you come in. So that's a special building. They don't make them like that anymore.
No, they don't, and that was where Wilt Chamberlain, of course, scored 100 points in a game back in March of 1962. And I'm not sure if they transferred the photos over to the new arena. Maybe they're still in the Hershey Park Arena, but in the media room, they had great photos all over the place of Wilt from that 100-point game. So I always used to enjoy, from a historical perspective, looking at all those photos as well.
Great. And you had of course, across those 2 seasons, I think you had Oli Kolzig overlap with you as well. So he's one, since we're a Capitals affiliate now, he's still around the organization quite a bit. So it's great to interact with him. And yeah, you had Barry Trotz as well on the bench. And as you go on to continue your career, he goes on to continue his. So it has to be really cool to see that bit of an overlap with the two of you rising to the next level.
Well, at the minor league level, thanks, Matt. At the minor league level, as you know, the broadcaster oftentimes is roommates on the road with either the bus driver, a trainer, an assistant coach. And for my 2 years in Baltimore, I was assigned on the road to share a room with Barry Trotz. So we have great memories, still a friend to this day. Of course, he won a Stanley Cup as head coach of Washington 2 years ago. I was 22 when I got the job. He was 27, if I'm not mistaken. And I learned so much, not only about hockey, but about life during those 2 years rooming with Barry. We also had on our team for about 40 games my first year, Joel Quenneville, who was acquired by Washington, was sent down. He was at the end of a long NHL career. They needed a depth defenseman in the organization. So on those bus rides during the 90-91 season, we had both Joel Quenneville and Barry Trotz, who are now, 30 years later, the second and fourth winningest head coaches in NHL history. So tremendous guys to be around. We had Oldie Kolzig, Byron Defoe were two of our goaltenders with the Skipjacks. We had some other players that went on to have long NHL careers. So great memories thinking back. But rooming with Barry Trotz was a lot of fun. We had one story he still tells is we were up in Utica, and we got to the hotel at 3 a.m. It was snowing. It was freezing. The heat didn't work in the room, and the snow and the ice was coming underneath the hotel room door, and we slept with all of our clothes and our winter coats on as well. So somehow we managed to get through that freezing night in Utica, New York.
Sounds like Utica. Thanks so much, Kenny.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Matt, for the question. Kenny, I've seen your boards in the past on some of your other forums, but a lot of folks wanted me to ask you, has your prep boiled down to, obviously you're using only 5-10% of the information that you're writing down, but has that boiled down to really the news and nuggets that you know that are probably going to make the air more than the tertiary things that a lot of us stay up till 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning and try to jam in on a broadcast?
So as I shift the laptop, there's a file cabinet just to my left, this black file cabinet.
Yeah.
The top 3 drawers of that file cabinet house, I would say 90% of the boards and charts from my entire career. There's another box with some of the minor league hockey boards, but every NFL game, and I think it's 425 if I'm not mistaken, the board from every NFL game is in that file cabinet to my left. 90% of the hockey games, most of the basketball games, the baseball games, I save them all. Nobody else would care except for possibly some of you on this chat to look at them. But I'll go back when I have another, a team the next time. I'll go back and refer to the board from the previous game. But I like to save them for historical purposes. I do most of my stuff by hand. I'm old school. I know a lot of broadcasters now have a computerized system. I'm not one who agrees with play-by-play announcers who farm it out, who have somebody else do their boards. I don't agree with that. I feel like you should do your own work. And even though you might use resources and references from so many other places, I still feel like writing the board by hand, that's how you memorize names and numbers and information. So I can promise you I will never have someone else to do the boards, do the research for me. And I do most of it by hand. I just feel like you remember it easier that way than if you type it into a computer. But you're right, Dave. You probably don't use more than 10 or 20% of the information in a given game, which is why I save it for the next time that I have that particular team. I remember early in my career, and I'm sure we all have similar stories. We would try to force information in that might not be pertinent at a particular time because you want to prove to the producer, to the bosses that you've done the work. And I think it probably took about 3 or 4 years to learn that you don't necessarily have to do that, that you should let the game dictate, let the game determine what notes and what nuggets you're going to use. I get asked about the preparation a lot. And for a football game, by far football tends to lead itself to the most preparation, I feel. With hockey and basketball, you're around the teams all the time. They're playing 3 or 4 games a week. Football, I might be assigned to a game week 15 of the NFL season, 2 teams that I haven't done all year. And I know in my mind that the millions of fans who are watching in those cities have probably watched almost every game that their favorite team has played. So I have to kind of play catch up throughout the course of the week. Now, I don't necessarily watch every game they've played, but I'll watch the last couple. I also try to read as much as possible starting on a Monday morning from both cities. Let's say it's Atlanta and New Orleans. I'll get my hands on every article that's been written, watch prior games, go to statistical sites. We have information sent to us by the teams and by Fox and by a clipping service as well. And at the start of the week, if I printed it all out, I probably have a pile, bigger than this screen. and you kind of narrow it down, and you know what to look through. And things have changed. You know, when I think back to the '94 NFL season, my first year, they were sending us articles on fax machines on the old round paper, and 40 pages of articles would spit out of a fax machine. Now it's one click of a button on the computer, and you can read whatever you want. Fox in 1994 would send us VHS tapes of both teams' previous game and our previous game so we can critique ourselves. About 5 or 6 years later, it became DVDs. So instead of arriving on Wednesday, they would arrive on Tuesday. Now, for the last 10 or 15 years, with DirecTV and with DVR, I've been able to tape both of my previous teams, and I could start Sunday night if I want to when I get home, watching those games. So it saves a lot of time as opposed to, you know, having to wait until Tuesday or Wednesday for a tape or a DVD to arrive. But I have a checklist in all sports of everything that I go through for each game. And football, like I said, is by far the most amount of hours. As far as the preparation, on a Friday, we usually get into the home city and we'll go to a practice in the morning, and then we'll sit down and talk to 4 or 5 players and coaches, and we'll do the same thing with the visiting team when they arrive on Saturday at their hotel. And then Sunday, the game comes. It's like an open book test. But again, you don't want to force any information. You want to let the game tell the story. With basketball and hockey, it's similar, but not as many hours. I do try to watch both teams' previous game if I can, catch up on all the articles written about those teams for the past 5, 6, 7 days normally, and prepare the charts and the stats and everything else that goes into it. But like I said, to me, the preparation is a lot of fun. I never feel like I'm, doing work that I don't like. There's a lot of reading. I don't get to read many books before the quarantine. I've read a few during this period, but during the normal work year, I don't get the chance to read a lot of books because I'm probably reading the equivalent of 10 to 20 books every week if you add up all the articles that we read and the various publications. So the preparation's a lot of fun, and I've rambled on, so I don't even remember what the original question was, but hopefully
No, it's great because you were describing how much you fell in love with the prep, and you continue to do so, and you take pride in that. I know that's something that people on here that know me personally, my charts, I do them handwritten like you, and they look like a beautiful mind, color-coded. Helps me retain the information, which is very important. So here's Amber Vickers, student athlete from Oklahoma. Amber, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. Say hello to Kenny.
Hello, Kenny. How are you?
Hello, Amber. Very good. How are you?
I'm doing fine. I have a question for you because I'm interested in college and professional sports, football and basketball. So should I start off in both or just start off in one and just ease my way into both? I'm trying to figure out how to get that balance because some of those seasons kind of run together a little bit. So I'm just trying to figure out how to do that balance.
So 2 questions, Amber. First of all, you're in college, I assume?
I graduated.
Graduated, okay.
Yes.
And are you interested in play-by-play, analysis, sideline reporting, studio hosting?
Ooh, I've really
little bit of everything.
Yeah, because I want to get as much experience in everything as I can to be more marketable. Because you can do more things when that's what they told me. When you can do more things, you're more marketable. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
The advice that I always give high school and college students and college graduates who want to get into broadcasting, try to do as much as possible, whether it's on air, behind the scenes. I mentioned earlier, I did a lot of sports writing in high school and college, did some work behind the scenes as well. For those who might not have the aspiration to be on the air in front of the microphone, there are so many jobs out there. On a typical NFL game, for example, on a Sunday afternoon on Fox or CBS, there are 70 or 80 folks involved in getting that broadcast on the air. The producer, the director, the graphics operator, the cameramen and women, the men and women who are running the replay machines. Even on an an NHL or an NBA regional game, there are probably 20 to 30 to 40 folks involved. So if being in front of the microphone or camera isn't your forte for anybody out there listening, there are certainly so many opportunities out there behind the scenes. But Amber, if being on the air is your goal, I would try to get as much experience as possible, whether on a podcast, on a local high school or college broadcast, no matter what the role might be, play-by-play, color, sideline reporting. I would also recommend looking into some of the cable stations that do high school and college events. There's also a terrific program, and you could find Laura Oakman on social media.
Actually, my mentor. So
great, because I was just. and did you go to Kansas?
We did it virtually this time around.
Did Dave mention that you were a Kansas student? Is that where you are?
Oh no, Oklahoma, University of Oklahoma.
Okay, because
Yeah.
Laura's alma mater is Kansas. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I had the right region of the country, but the wrong school.
Yeah.
So Laura was the sideline reporter with our crew for a couple of years, and runs a tremendous program called Galvanize, and you can find it on social media. And it's great to hear, Amber, that Laura's your mentor and that you've already hooked up with her, because I would highly advise that for anybody looking to get into the sideline reporting aspect of the business. So you're in great hands already, even before you chatted with me today.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you so much.
All right, thanks, Amber. Really appreciate that. So there's a lot of questions still for Kenny, but I know Kenny has another appointment to get to.
I just got a text. I do have about 15 or 20 more minutes, if that's okay.
No, that's whatever you have time. Everybody's appreciative. So I'll just keep having people come on and ask questions if that's good with you.
Sure.
And hey, Dave, and I don't want to be rude at all. I actually do have another 2 interviews I have to conduct after this. Is there any way that I can ask a 2-second question or no?
Yeah. Yes, sir. Go ahead, Patrick.
I do apologize. I'll be very, very brief. First off, thank you for coming on here, Mr. Albert. I really appreciate you doing that. I do PA announcing and interviews for a sports show right now, and I wondered what would you have as an interviewer, or not even sideline, but an interviewer of athletes and coaches. What is a good way to approach doing research for the interview?
That's a good question, Patrick.
Thank you, Dave.
Before you ask the specific question about research, when you brought up doing interviews, I was going to mention that one of the a pointer that I would pass along regarding interviews is always listen to the answers. I know a lot of times early in our careers when we've all done interviews, you're probably so focused on memorizing the questions that you want to ask and remembering what that next question is going to be, that there might be something in the answer that could lead to a great next question. And it's happened to all of us, where you're not really paying so much attention to the answer because you're so worried about the next question. So number one, I would say, aside from having those questions formulated in your mind and keeping track of what you want to ask next, for all of you, is to make sure that you're really listening to the answer as well. As far as research, and as I talked about in the prior question prior to Amber regarding preparation, I'm a big research guy, and I try to get my hands on as much as possible when getting ready for an interview. I hosted a video Zoom the other day for the Knicks organization with 3 former players, John Starks, Larry Johnson, and Herb Williams. And it was to discuss the 90s and some of their glory years, and 94 and 99. And even though I lived through those years and, was watching a lot of the games on TV and had so many memories, I made sure to go back and did about an hour of research on the internet, Wikipedia, various websites, some other publications, team media guides, just to make sure that I didn't miss anything. And just to use an example, when I was looking at some Larry Johnson information, and I went to his career statistics, and I clicked on the box score from one of the games that he played in with Charlotte against the Knicks, it was a reminder to me that Del Curry was one of his teammates, Steph Curry's dad, for all 5 years in Charlotte. So I was then able to ask a question to Larry Johnson about what was it like having a 3-year-old through 8-year-old Steph Curry showing up at your practices every day. And if I hadn't been doing this research and clicking on various sites and various box scores from games, it probably would not have popped into my mind. So I would just try to do as much as possible leading up to an interview. whether in books, magazines, on the internet, websites. Just try to get your hands on as much as you possibly can.
And Kenny, as a young gentleman who grew up, imitating you and doing cassette, interviews and cassette commercials, listening to you on radio and on TV, it's a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it, Patrick. Thanks very much.
All right, thanks, Patrick. Let's go to another Hershey Bear, Zach Fish. Hey, Zach, I know you've been waiting a long time. Thanks for your patience.
Kenny, appreciate it. Thanks for Matt's answering his questions. We could probably go down a memory lane of Hershey for quite a bit. Matt's my media coordinator. I'm the broadcaster in Hershey and have been for 4 years. I've filled in for John Walton a few times with the Caps. I know you know John well. My question is, when you were working with the Skipjacks, you mentioned your color commentator, former coach, you're working with people that are sometimes coming into the booth for the first time. And while it's different, once you have a very established color commentator at a network that's being compensated for this. Times in Hershey, I have Mitch Lamru, a former Skipjack himself and former Hershey Bear, who does a great job, but these guys are getting paid very minimally or given tickets. How do you guide a color commentator to ultimately provide yourself the best broadcast possible? You build a rapport with them, but when they're necessarily maybe not someone that's being paid to do this professionally as a time, and you had this a little bit earlier in your career, just what advice overall, working with some great analysts, would you have for broadcasters at a younger level that might be working with players for the first time or just getting into this?
Well, Zach, first of all, glad to hear things are going well in Hershey. There have been a long line of great broadcasters. During my 2 years in Baltimore, Dan Kamal was the radio voice of the Hershey Bears, and he went on to have a long career with the Atlanta Thrashers and the Columbus Blue Jackets in the NFL and or NHL, and we still keep in touch. So it was Dan Kamal back in '90, and John Walton, of course, spent a number of years in Hershey, who's a good friend. So glad to hear you're continuing the tradition. When I think back to those Baltimore days, I would often have injured players do color with me, and they're certainly not polished broadcasters. And I remember on the road one time, one of them still had his headset mic on, and he started talking to some of the fans that were walking up the steps, and we had to hit the cough button after a couple of seconds because their conversation started to come through on the air. I probably have a unique perspective as far as color analysts because I've worked with, and I keep a list, and some of you may have seen a story that was done a couple of years ago. I've worked with over 225 color analysts in the various sports. Some of them I've worked hundreds of games with, others I've worked one game with. And someone asked me who my favorite has been and who I did not enjoy working with. And I can honestly say that I can't remember one analyst that I did not enjoy working with. Normally it's a former player or coach in their given sport. And the way I look at it is I'm sort of the traffic cop. I'm there to set up the play, call the play, maybe finish it up. Football, for example, at the end of the play, give the down and distance for the next play coming up, and then get out of the way and let the color analyst come in. Baseball, I think the color analyst becomes the star because there's so much downtime. Hockey and basketball, it's a little more challenging, especially on the radio, because there's not a lot of time for the analyst to come in. But similar to Patrick's question about doing interviews just prior, when I'm working with a new color analyst, I'll do research on that person. A lot of them, we tend to know all about their careers and their big moments, depending who it is, but some of them not as much. So I'll go back and do some research on the color analyst just so I can lead them into certain stories, certain situations. Maybe if they're recently retired, they played with and have relationships with some of the players and coaches who are in that specific game that you're working with them. So I will tend to do research on the color analyst. And then if it's a novice, if it's somebody new or a former player who really hasn't done it that much, I'll try to give them some pointers prior to the game. I worked with Howie Long and Terry Bradshaw on a Sugar Bowl back in 2007, and everybody knows who they are, and they've been in the studio for the last 26 years on Fox NFL Sunday. But in 2007, they were brought out of the studio to work this Sugar Bowl game between Notre Dame and LSU. And Terry had called some games prior to that. Howie had not. So we had a couple of rehearsals in empty stadiums, and Howie would ask questions like, how should I put on the headset? What does the cough button do? And was so gracious to everybody around him. He was a superstar, but he was leaning on us to teach him how to do an actual game broadcast. And he was tremendous. He did such a good job on that game, as did Terry, and it was a real memorable experience. But even in a situation like that, with a seasoned vet in the studio, just something as simple as putting on the headset or reaching for the cough button, we had to give him some pointers. So, I've worked with veteran analysts. I've worked with guys who had never been in a booth before. So with all of them, I think the one constant is trying to do a little bit of research and making them feel comfortable and easing them into the broadcast right from the start.
Awesome. Thanks, Kenny. And I got kicked off the air in Rochester, my first American League game a few years ago. So I think it's a rite of passage. I appreciate you doing this.
Well, we have something in common. It happened to both of us at our first game. I also had to do a playoff game in Binghamton on a phone, handing it back and forth to my analyst because the equipment just didn't want to work that day.
Yep, I did the cell phone broadcast that day in Rochester. We got on the air, it worked out. But
well, we didn't have cell phones. Cell phones didn't exist back then.
Yep,
so
yeah. Done it a little bit everything. So that's awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Zach.
Thanks, Zach. Kenny, here's Mark Ernay, someone you may know from 10-10 Wins. Hello, Mark. Should be coming on in a moment. Mark, going once. Going twice.
How about now, Dave?
Sold.
Good now? Hi, guys.
New car, Mark. Go ahead.
I was actually just moving my lips. I wasn't saying anything.
That's all good. Go ahead.
Kenny, I know you're pressed for time. Quick question. Having come from a broadcasting family as you do, not just your dad, but your uncles, how much pressure was there on you to get into the business? How much did you feel that you could not avoid becoming a sports broadcaster?
Great question, Mark, and I'll get to that in a second. But for everybody else listening and watching, I get to see Mark every summer at Hofstra University at the tremendous sportscasting camp that they run, which was started by Ed Ingles, who passed away recently. And he was a great mentor to myself about 30 years ago, and Mark and so many other broadcasters of all ages. So I felt like once I saw Mark on the screen, I couldn't let the opportunity go to mention the great Ed Ingles, who worked for many years at WCBS 880, did Jets broadcast, did a Super Bowl on national radio. So I'm sure, Mark, you would echo those feelings as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
That was the best. But as far as Mark's question, you might not believe me, but I really felt no pressure. Like I said, I had that toy tape recorder and I just started doing it myself because I loved it. So I really felt no pressure whatsoever to get into broadcasting, sportscasting. In fact, I was probably kind of quiet and shy about it to my family. They knew I would do it into the tape recorder. And there might have been a point where they thought, during the high school years that sports writing was going to be the avenue where I was headed. But I knew myself which way I wanted to go. So felt absolutely no pressure at all. I did feel like once I got into the business, spending my first 5 years away from my hometown, away from New York, the job with the Skipjacks, and then 3 years with Home Team Sports. So 5 years living in the state of Maryland. I felt like that did give me the opportunity to sort of create my own identity, learn how to do the job, how to do the research, how to incorporate everything together. So when I moved back to New York and started with MSG and the Rangers in '95, again, I really didn't feel any pressure. I was working hockey on the radio, and I had been doing it for 5 years at the time. So, maybe I was naive about it, but I really didn't feel any pressure. And I felt like, again, like I created my own identity, proved myself during the 5 years in Washington. And, I get the question sometimes about breaking into the business at such a young age. Myself, Tom Brenneman, Joe Buck, right. With fathers in the business. And it certainly opened doors as far as meeting people and perhaps getting an internship here and there. But I think, at some point you have to prove yourself and do the work on your own, and you're not going to keep your job if you don't. So that's kind of the way I look at it, is that, 30 years later, we all still have our jobs. So I guess we must be doing something right. We're not just hired just because of who we are. But really felt no pressure at all to get into this. You know, there are so many lawyers, I guess, whose sons become lawyers, sons and daughters, and policemen, firemen, etc. So it's certainly not the only business where children follow in their parents' footsteps, but it's probably one of the more fun ones out there.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Thank
Mark.
you, Mark. Really appreciate it. Here's Eric Hauser. I know Eric works with you on some Fox football broadcasts.
Yes, we've spent many hours on the field together prior to games with Eric and Brian Baldinger and Moose Johnston and some of my other partners through the years as well.
Eric, how are you today? He has the shades on here.
On and talking to us. Thanks again for you and your wife fattening up the production crew and the graphics truck and everything with those delicious donuts you bring to MetLife Stadium.
My wife gets all the credit for that, for sure.
Yes,
anytime we have a local game, we do try and keep the guys in the production truck healthy.
Yes, thank you. I'm really curious because you do 3 sports where the seasons overlap, and with basketball and hockey, they have the same. Their playoffs run around the same time. How does that all get worked out? At what takes precedence when the schedules collide like that? How do you figure that out? How do the networks deal with that?
I get asked that question often, Eric, and through 26 years at Fox and 25 at MSG and now 10 at NBC, the various bosses through the years at all 3 networks have been terrific about the juggling of the schedule, in particular, certain times of the year. And there are others at MSG, Mike Breen, who does such a great job with the Knicks as the national voice of the NBA on ABC and ESPN. He misses about 20 to 25 Knick games a year. MSG allows him to miss those games for the national broadcasts. And I'm actually a beneficiary of that because I'll slide over to work the Knicks telecast when Mike's not there. Sam Rosen, the great TV voice of the Rangers for over 30 years, has done a lot of Fox football games over the last 25 years, and MSG is great about that as well. So there are a number of us out there who do work for multiple networks. And again, I can't say enough about how generous they've been about the juggling. Football does take precedent. So I've never missed an NFL broadcast. So Friday through Sunday, every weekend during the NFL season, I'm in the city where my assignment is on that given week. There have been the occasional times where I may work a Friday night Knick or Ranger game if it's close by, depending where I am for football. But for the most part, Friday through Sunday, I'm on the football trail. So I usually miss about 15 Rangers radio games due to football. And then MSG slides me over to the 20 Knick games. So that's their decision. So if I have to miss a Ranger game for a Knick television broadcast, that's MSG sliding me over. And with NBC, they're also great about scheduling me during the regular season on non-Knick or Ranger game days. So I usually work about 15 to 20 NBC regular season hockey games on the off days from the MSG teams. And it does get a little hairy in April and May during the hockey playoffs when the years when the Rangers advance pretty deep. And I'm working NBC as well through the Western Conference Final. 2014 and 15 were crazy. In 2014, I was working the Eastern Conference Final between the Rangers and Montreal. We saw that clip earlier from Game 6 on the radio side. LA against Chicago on the TV side in the West Final. So bouncing back and forth, taking red eyes, crazy flights, but somehow worked 12 out of the 13 games during that conference final. And then the next year, it was the Rangers, Tampa, Chicago, and Anaheim, and did almost every game there as well. So, again, you're running adrenaline during those times of the year. MSG was also great about letting me miss some games during the Winter Olympics in 2016, 2018, and 2014, 2010. So it is a bit of a jigsaw puzzle, but somehow it always seems to work out. But to answer the original question, Eric, the football does take precedence during the September through December months. And Actually did miss a football game last year, but that was Fox's decision during a baseball playoff series. This year it actually worked out where the football game was in Houston on a Sunday and the baseball series was in Houston on Friday and Saturday. So that actually magically somehow worked out that both sports were in the same city.
How loud are those trash cans in Houston at Minute Maid Park there?
I had a headset on, so honestly, I didn't hear any banging of the trash can. It was loud in the building, though. I will say that when the Astros were scoring all those runs in the early innings in Game 5 against the Rays last October, it was loud.
Thanks, Kenny.
Thanks, Eric. And I hope to see you on a football field this coming September or October, hopefully at the latest.
Fingers crossed.
Absolutely.
Kenny, I wanted to wrap up Eric's question with something on prep. When you prepare, you mentioned all the different leagues that you work with and for. When you prepare for back-to-back-to-back, maybe, are you doing boards sometimes, hotels, just day of game because you're just too busy, you can't get ahead of prep, like a week out, 2 weeks out that maybe you would like to, and you're a guy that likes to handwrite it like a lot of us on here. So how do you do all your boards? Are you doing them at airports waiting for the plane to take off? Can you give us a little behind-the-scenes insight about when you have that hectic schedule, which I'm sure, like you said, you often do in April, May?
Sure. The only time that I'll ever do anything day of game board-wise might be for the odd hockey game on the radio, because I'm around the team all the time and I don't necessarily have to put down as much information. So that doesn't happen too often. Usually I'll do it the day before. But that's the only time it would be a day of game type thing. And that doesn't happen too often. A lot of it is done in hotel rooms, in airports, in the airline lounge at an airport, maybe even at a game. If I'm there 3 hours before, I might start to get ahead for another game. Football, I will always start on Monday for a Sunday game doing the board, even if it's just writing down the names and numbers. I might have another game that night, so I don't have as much time. But I feel like I have to do it on Monday because then I feel like I'm behind if I haven't started the board Monday. And I'd also like to have at least the names and numbers in when I start to watch the other games that the teams played the prior week, because then I have a feel for where they are on the board, who the players are, et cetera. For a basketball game, and I do 20 games, they're sometimes sporadic. It might only be one a week. Sometimes there could be 2 in a week or even 3. Sometimes I might go 2 or 3 weeks without working a basketball game. So I'll usually try to do those a bit in advance, at least 4 or 5 days. Basketball, the rosters don't change that much. You have a good feel for who the starters are. So if I do it 4 or 5 days in advance, not much is going to change. So the football board, I'll always start on Monday for a Sunday game. Basketball, probably 4 or 5 days. For a hockey TV game, it's usually I'll start at least 3 or 4 days in advance, at least putting down the particulars as well. But for a hockey game on the radio in the regular season, it's probably 1 or 2 days before, and sometimes it might be the day of the game if it's a busy week, but I never usually leave it to the last minute.
With the hockey games, when NBC first instituted the Inside the Glass guys with Pierre McGuire, Brian Boucher, I know you've done some work with AJ Malesko as well. Easy or harder for you when you don't have that male or female analyst side by side with you? If it's just a 2-man, 2-woman show, you're upstairs in the Crow's Nest or on the Chase Bridge, and they're downstairs between the benches.
And they're all great friends, all 3 that you just mentioned, and they all do a great job. AJ, I've worked 4 Olympics with, as well as NHL games. Pierre, Brian Boucher do such a wonderful job between the glass. Now, oftentimes with Pierre, it is only the 2 of us, and sometimes with Brian. But usually when I work with Brian or AJ, there is another analyst up in the booth, Eddie Olczyk or Joe Micheletti. So oftentimes it's a 3-person booth. Or sometimes AJ might be upstairs and Pierre's downstairs, for example. The 2018 Olympics, the women's gold medal game, AJ and I were up in the booth. Pierre was downstairs between the glass. I feel like I'm potentially more equipped than many others because I went through 8 years with Darryl Johnston upstairs and Tony Siragusa downstairs on the field at NFL games. And Tony's mic was open. He didn't look at himself as a sideline reporter. He was a sideline analyst. he was able to jump in anytime, similar to the folks in hockey who are inside the glass. They're not sideline reporters. They can come in whenever they want. So you really have to have a great nonverbal communication, kind of get a feel for their voice inflection and tone of voice and when they might want to come in and say something. There is the occasional game where I'm upstairs and Pierre's alone downstairs or Brian's alone downstairs. So it certainly is a different rhythm. Last year in the conference final, I had Mike Milbury up in the booth and Pierre downstairs. So you do kind of have to get used to each and every of your analysts. But I feel like because I had the 8 years with Moose and Goose, with one upstairs, one downstairs, I was used to it. I mean, I've run the gamut. I've worked with two others in the booth. I've worked with one in the booth, one downstairs. I've worked games alone, especially early in my career. So, all situations have probably been accounted for. Working with Walt Clyde Frazier and the tremendous job he does. He does have a little bit of a different pace than some other color analysts, so it did take some time to get used to. And there are others out there as well who might have a certain pace or a different rhythm than others. So in a way, I'm studying my color analysts as well while I'm working with them and perhaps watching them do games with other play-by-play announcers as well.
No, I appreciate you sharing that insight. And I just want to wrap this up because I know you have to go with a couple rapid fire questions, if you don't mind. And again, I think everybody here, I know a lot of people have more questions for you. So when Kenny has to go, everybody, and I know I see like maybe 15 of you, we can continue the conversation talking about radio, TV.
And by the way, Dave, before you start the rapid fire, if anybody watching and listening ever has a question or has a sample link of play-by-play, happy to take a listen. I'm easy to get in touch with either through Dave or through social media. So feel free to get in touch at any time with any questions that you might have.
Yeah.
Can I do this through Jeremy Treatment or Artie Kepner?
Absolutely.
Hello, my friend. It's so great to see you.
Good to see you as well.
Sorry.
For those who have no idea what we're talking about, Artie Kepner is a longtime Fox director who has done Super Bowls and so many other big events. And Jeremy Treatman runs the play-by-play camps out of Philadelphia. I've spoken during the New Jersey portion every summer for the last 10 or 15 years.
May I just say one quick thing, Dave? I know I'm temporarily unmuted. So first of all, great to see you. We've gone back, yourself and of course Eric Hauser smiling in the on the background. I can see his face. We've all had the opportunity to work together at Fox. We've had great conversations. My question: I am starting a new job at a local station here in Philadelphia, 610 ESPN Radio, and my first show debuts this Saturday, 12 to 1, 610ESPN.com. If you want to listen in New Jersey, you're welcome on as a guest anytime. We'll definitely we'll hook you up with that. Sorry. So what advice would you have going after sponsors?
Something that I have not had to do in about 20 years. During my time with the Skipjacks, I think I mentioned earlier, I made 3 sales during the course of the summer, and we threw in everything. For $500, my 3 sales were to a hotel gym, a golf driving range, mini golf, batting cage complex, and the third was a sports bar in Fells Point in Baltimore, downtown. And for $500, we gave them everything. We gave them season tickets. We gave them a commercial on the radio. We gave them an ad on the boards. Whatever they wanted, we threw in there. So I'm probably not the right person to ask as far as sales, but I'm sure many of you are terrific salespeople. So good luck with that aspect of it.
Hey, and give my love to your wife. Great to see you. Hope to see you down the road at Fox. I'll tell Jeremy Sonolo, thank you for doing that Zoom at play-by-play, because Jeremy loves you very, very much. Always a pleasure, my friend. I'll talk to you soon.
Good luck with the show this weekend.
Thanks, Kenny.
All right. Thanks, Jacob. I appreciate that. Kenny, here you go. And again, I sincerely thank you for the amount of time you took with all of us today. All right. Some rapid fire answer how you would like. Doesn't need to be a one-word answer. Taped stand-up or live stand-up? All the events you do.
Live. I think you have a much better feel when you do it live, the crowd noise. I have done taped at many events for various reasons, but I prefer live for sure. I think you're just more into it when you do it live.
NHL shootout game-winning goal or a walk-off home run in baseball?
Wow. I mean, if it's the playoffs, I would say either or are great. They don't have shootouts in the NHL playoffs. It would have to be an overtime goal, but there's nothing like a hockey overtime goal, but there's also nothing like a home run such as Batista, even though it wasn't a walk-off, it was in the 7th inning. So that's a tough one to answer.
A best travel tip you can give us for all the neophyte travelers that maybe go once with their families every maybe 2 years, but you're going through the airports a lot. So I know things might change now with travel, but when you were on the road a lot recently.
It's actually not a tip for you. It's a tip for others. When you're on an airplane and you're walking forward up the aisle, don't grab onto the seat for leverage, because that's what I hate. That's one of my pet peeves, when you're sitting in a seat on an airplane and somebody grabs the back of it to help get up or to help them move up the aisle.
Oh, gosh. I see some of these videos on social media, people kicking each other's seats. I know that happens all the time, and I agree with that point there. Tossing to a game break, whether you're throwing to the studio to Kurt Menefee or others, or Terry Bradshaw, or signing off end of the show smoothly.
I have two, if I could interject with an anecdote. I have two favorite game break throws in my career. The first one was back in the late 90s when James Brown was still at Fox in our studio before moving to CBS. And we had a visitor in our booth at the Georgia Dome. I was working with Tim Green at the time. And the other James Brown was getting set for a post-game concert at the Georgia Dome. So our producer, P.T. Navarro, somehow arranged for James Brown to come into the booth and join us for a couple of minutes. So during the commercial break, I explained to the singer, James Brown, that we had James Brown in the studio. Would you mind throwing to a game break? And it was something to the effect of, from one JB to another. So it wasn't me throwing to that game break, but I set the whole thing up. The other one was a 16-inning game, if I'm not mistaken, Yankees-Red Sox at Fenway a couple of years ago. And I'm not sure who was in the studio, Kevin Burkhardt or Chris Myers or one of the others, but A-Rod was one of the analysts in the studio. And I actually had to throw it to A-Rod for a game break, and then he threw it back to me. So that was kind of surreal, having Alex Rodriguez throw it back to me following a game break. You probably never want the end of game sign off to not go smoothly, because it's kind of the last thing you say on the air that day. So if I had to have a little, blip in one of them, it would probably rather have it be the game break, because you have more of them throughout the game. I'd probably rather have the end of game situation go smoothly, because then you're kicking yourself for an hour or two after the game if something went wrong.
If I may just follow up, because I think a lot of people on here will be fascinated about the game breaks, how that goes about. I know with doing events with ESPN, we don't, at least the shows that I've been on, we don't even get a net return monitor. I know you would get that, where you would see maybe the guys.
Usually there have been occasions where it's not working when it's supposed to, and you can actually not see, sometimes not hear the highlight. You hope that doesn't happen, but there have been occasions where we cannot see what they're describing on the game break.
Yeah, and we've touched on this with Kevin Harlan, who's been on, and Sean McDonough, and Mike Corey, who's been on as well. How tough is that when you're hearing in the mix minus in your headset, if you don't see the net return? Is a producer getting in your ear as soon as it happens? Hey, can it go to game break? And you're just trusting that producer who's trusting an AD to get you back to LA? How does that all work, if you don't mind sharing the behind the scenes there?
Right. You pretty much have to trust the producer. And if you can't hear or see what the highlight is, then you just, thanks, Kurt, and then you move on. Yeah. You can't, oftentimes we like to refer to what we just saw or mention something about that team that had just scored. But if you don't know what happened, obviously you can't. As far as the mix minus, which is when you kind of hear yourself double at times in the headset if it's not adjusted, I would say the worst thing that's happened as far as that is, on occasion, a couple of times when you're ready to do the game opening and you're hearing yourself in echo. and there's no way to communicate with the truck. You're on the air live, and you just have to get through it and pretend that you don't hear it. And that's probably the toughest situation audio-wise that can happen, aside from not being on the air at all, is if you start hearing an echo and hearing yourself 3 seconds after you said whatever you said, hearing it again, it could be pretty distracting.
Yeah, it certainly is. And I'm not going to ask you your favorite theme music for the NHL or an MSG theme or NFL on Fox, but I would like to ask you, what are you thinking about in that moment before you're going live to, like I heard you say on one of these type of forums where it's, your Fox games potentially could go to 40 million people. I know you called it international Super Bowl as well. I believe that was Giants Patriots, and that went around the world. What are you thinking about when the open animation is going, you're hearing the music? Or are you just focused on what you want to say in your stand-up? Are you reading from a card? How do you handle that live moment?
The NFL and Fox theme music is really cool. When I think back to the early days in the 90s, it really got you fired up, and it still does. In the early years, when I think back, I would definitely get nervous before some of the stand-ups. That kind of went away. But there was a different feel, and I've had the great fortune, up until this point, to work 5 NFL playoff games, divisional round games for Fox. And it definitely was a different feel as we were getting ready to do the open on those games. Even though I prepare the same way, whether it's an NFL playoff game or a preseason hockey game, I still prepare as if it's the Super Bowl every game, or at least I try to. But there definitely was a different feel prior to some of those divisional round games. When I think back to New Orleans, San Francisco in January of 2012, it was a tremendous game. 4 touchdowns in the last 4 minutes, back and forth, Alex Smith to Vernon Davis. And, you don't really think about it during the game as far as the number of listeners or viewers. I might do a hockey game where there are only a couple of thousand people listening on the radio. And then, you wind up checking out the ratings the next day. And the New Orleans-San Francisco playoff game, for example, I think had over 40 million viewers. But I never really think about it during the game because I try to do every game like it's, the biggest game of your career. I remember Joe DiMaggio talking about giving his all every game because there might be one person in the stands who had never seen him before. So, big games, the gold medal women's game in 2018, that certainly had the feel of a huge game. And I had a lot of texts coming in during the course of the game, even though it was midnight, 1 a.m. back home when we were in Pyeongchang in South Korea. Baseball playoff games, you just sense there are so many people watching, but I really prepare the same way. And sure, you probably get some butterflies before the biggest broadcast that you do when it's a playoff game or a really big situation.
I love seeing how different play-by-play announcers, studio hosts, whether on location or in the studio, how they handle opens. And I'm always marveling at how smooth men and women are on your level doing those moments where a lot of us on here know, you're not reading from a teleprompter. It's not like you're in a local newscast. And whether, you get to, an opening thought, or you have the, just you on camera, the Chris Collinsworth slide where you're bringing in your analyst, Rondé Barber in your case, and others. I just find those little tidbits. I'm just a geek about that. I'm always fascinated how all these networks and teams craft their opens creatively. So,
well, one thing I would do with Moose Johnston during our years together, and I continued it with Rondé, we would always give a little fist bump prior to the open, about 30 seconds prior to the open. And in Moose and Rondé's case, they both were Super Bowl champions and occasionally would wear their Super Bowl ring. So it became a little superstition. Whenever they would be wearing their Super Bowl ring, I would fist bump the ring. And I remember on one occasion with Darryl, we did it a little harder than I expected. And fortunately, there was not blood gushing out of my hand, but I thought there might be about 20 seconds before we went on the air because of the angle which my fist collided with his Super Bowl ring.
No, I was thinking maybe get a tattoo or an imprint there from his big ring. Last one, Kenny, for you. And again, thank you for the couple hours today of your time. We all really do appreciate it. Lighthearted note here, Joanna Man or Game Day from your movie appearances for those that may not know.
Well, I had a bigger role in Game Day. However, it never made it to the theaters. It only made it to video. I had a much smaller role in Joanna Man, but it actually made it into the theaters. So Richard Lewis was the star of Game Day. He's a good friend. You probably all know him from Curb Your Enthusiasm. So check it out on video. Funny story about Juwanna Mann. It wasn't that funny at the time. My luggage was lost the night before. There was a storm. I had to take a different flight. So a lot of the clothes that I'm wearing in the scene in Juwanna Mann were not my own. I had to borrow a shirt and a tie and a sport jacket. But that one actually did make it into the theaters. Vivica Fox and a number of NBA players were in that one. So ironically, in both movies I was in, I played a play-by-play announcer, both basketball movies, and fun to reminisce. But Juwanna Mann of the two was the one that made it into the theaters.
I always love hearing broadcaster stories of their cameos in a lot of movies. I know your father's been in a lot as well. So Kenny, thank you so much for the time. Continued health, success, and happiness to you and your family. And we appreciate you inspiring. This is why I do this, is for us to all come together and learn when we're not on the air, and to get better when we come back. And I hope we all come back stronger.
Well, Dave, I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. Hope everybody stays safe, and hopefully we're back to watching the sports and the teams that we all love real soon. And to everybody out there, thanks for taking the last 2 hours to join in. And as I said earlier, if you ever have a question, I'm pretty easy to find either on social media or through Dave.
All right. Thanks, Kenny, again.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. That's Kenny Albert there. And Kenny, I'm just going to wrap up the interview with collecting some thoughts from everybody. So you're welcome to stay, or if you have to go, we understand as well. And we can't thank Kenny enough for the time we have, everybody. And while there's still time in today's Zoom that's left over, I wanted to talk about a lot of the things that Kenny discussed about radio and TV broadcasting for those that want to stay on. And I saved this on each of the Zooms because I wanted to get into the nuts and bolts of radio and TV play-by-play. So for those that are hanging on, and you're welcome to, we're going to talk about some play-by-play particulars here, and then we'll chime in on at some points during the call if anybody has any questions and comments about some of the things that I'm going to share, a lot what I learned and a lot from Kenny, and we'll weave them in. So as we know, Kenny Albert, 24 years as the voice of the New York Rangers, and a lot of you on here are hockey aficionados and announcers on here, or maybe fans of hockey and have heard Kenny and others do games. And these are the type of things that I'm always fascinated about when I listen to play-by-play on the radio. And I know a lot of you may be doing more TV or streaming nowadays. You're a college broadcaster, but I think some of the themes to look out for when you're hearing some of the big-time broadcasters, a couple of them in detail. Time and score. I tell a lot of broadcasters that send me tapes, send me clips. I'll say you can never say the time and score enough. It kills me sometimes. I'm in the car with my wife or my dad or my mom, and we're driving and we're listening to a game on Sirius, and the announcer, no matter what level, is not saying the score. And also another thing here is identification of the team. A lot of announcers might assume that the listeners on there are just local audience, local fans. But I will tell you, sometimes it's good to say, here come the Bears up the neutral zone into the other team's end, or here come the Lakers bringing up the ball. Here's Villanova across midcourt. I'm talking radio here, everybody. I would say if we could all incorporate, and I'm challenging myself to do this too when I do some radio play-by-play, if we can incorporate the team names more often than maybe we thought of, that might help our listeners ascertain who actually is in possession. Just something to think about here. As often as we say time and score, I think it's important to weave that in. I heard a tape recently, which was great, but it was just identifying all the players, and that's it. And I didn't know even the teams that were involved, and it doesn't matter if that was a local high school team, NAIA, or Division I school. I think it's important to give the teams their due there. There's a lot of talented broadcasters when it comes to description, vocabulary, volume control, and pace. Slowing down on the transition moments for me is a crucial one. That's something that I've wanted to really master, because I hear some great play-by-play where Dave, Mike to John, shoot, scores, Temple up by 2, and how to stay on top of the play. And Colin, to kick off this broadcast meeting today, asked Kenny how to stay on top of the play doing hockey. And I know a lot of you have commented to me that you think that hockey play-by-play guys are not like Kenny, where they're not doing all these other sports because they've mastered their craft. Hockey is maybe arguably the hardest sport to call, just given the sheer speed. I do box lacrosse as well, and I can tell you it's almost like an ice hockey pace. So I think that's really important to just think about over time when you guys are on air on the radio side, or if it's for a college athletics internet stream. Play-by-play versus analyst time. I think it's really important to know that on radio, I think Kenny mentioned this, being the voice of the New York Rangers, does Stanley Cup Finals and playoffs on Westwood One Radio, that 95% of the time, it's your domain as the play-by-play guy. You're the one that's steering the ship. Yes, a producer and engineer might be saying, hey, the next media timeout, you're going to quickly throw to a break, or maybe a toss back to the studio for an update. If you're on the network level, we're working for a big team. But it's important to decipher whatever sport you're doing, and this is on the radio specifically, when the analyst should come in and when they shouldn't. And I think it's important. A lot of you have commented on these Zooms about having that conversation. How do you go about having a conversation with an announcer pregame that maybe you haven't worked with? A lot of us are younger in the business who are still on here, and it's okay to have that conversation to point out what would be good for the broadcast for the show. Don't make it about yourself. A lot of people I've worked with in the past that I thought, man, there could have been a better way to go about that situation, is not how I want the broadcast to be run, but how it will make it sound better for everybody listening. So that's something to think about when you have that conversation with, whether it's a fellow student that's not a former athlete or coach, or somebody else that maybe has not dabbed into broadcasting yet. So have those conversations pregame, and don't just have them 5 minutes before you're about to go on air. Like Kenny says, research the person, grab dinner the night before. If you're a student, meet up with the student union or your favorite campus restaurant or off campus. You know the deal there, and have a conversation that might facilitate the action. And you never know what could come up on air with some funny moments. The last two things on radio, and then I'll ask for some feedback here before I get into some TV play-by-play, is the 76ers. I'm from the Philadelphia area, for those that don't know. The Sixers broadcast, Tom McGinnis, does a great job over the last, I would say, a couple years. He's been playing some sound bites coming out of break, which I think are awesome. And he's not just saving some interviews for halftime. I know a lot of us on here that may be just radio play-by-play people or studio hosts pre-tape things, and you roll them back for a halftime fill. I recommend, if you have time and you control your commercials and can come back early from break, or the players, I see this a lot in college basketball or football, they're still in the huddles. They come back, you come back early and you have time, play a sound bite. It will help your broadcast and add to just the nuts and bolts of you calling the action, or just filling with your analysts, which sometimes we get into a lot of situations like that where we're just talking about fluff, or maybe from other games and scores just to fill time. I recommend trying to compile some interviews and some cool sound that you can add in your broadcast. It would definitely add to your overall product. Transitions to and from break, I think I've challenged myself, and I asked Kenny Albert this about how are you smooth on a game break? How are you polished signing off? I think that's really important, especially in those type of moments. You don't want to stutter. You don't want to say or like in totality on your broadcast. But I've learned, just my experience, and again, I'm going to open this up to others, sometimes short and sweet is the best. And I know a lot of us have a lot of things to say and want to sound smart. And Kenny said that in particular when you're younger. But when you're throwing to a studio or to commercial, whether you're on ESPN or you're doing a local college game, or just throwing to a title card or a screen that says we'll be back, try to be smooth, concise, and succinct. on your tosses, or some people call them throws. And then finally, building to the big play. Controlling your volume and pace, not screaming on the radio. A lot of younger people are guilty of this. I have been in those shoes too, continue sometimes still to find myself in these places, and that's okay because we're all learning and growing in our respective fields. But controlling your volume, pitch, and your energy, where yes, it sounds like a bigger call, but try not to be screaming and try not to see those decibel levels go into the red, or you see that mic going from left to right into the red. I think a lot of you know what I'm talking about when it comes to reading a radio instrument. It's very important to understand the levels. And if you need to practice that at home into a tape recorder or into a toothbrush or a hairbrush, and think about how your calls change, and you can mock some game-winning calls by a lot of announcers on YouTube, I would really consider working on it. And it's something that I continue to challenge myself to work on as well. So before I move on to the TV play-by-play side, does anybody have any comments to what I said on radio play-by-play? And I went into some really particulars, and we can go a little bit deeper there. But if you have any comments on that, feel free to chime in. I don't want a lot of people talking over one another, just to make this smooth. But feel free to unmute yourself. Let's focus on radio play-by-play. Go ahead, Danny. Yes, sir.
Hey, how is everybody doing? I hope everybody is safe, first of all, and doing well. Kenny was great, first off, and he was excellent. And
absolutely
pick his brain about a lot of great stuff, but I come from a pro wrestling aspect, as I have the New Japan Pro Wrestling T-shirt on today, and I get the volume control and pace a lot in my calls, because I try to imitate these wrestling announcers who are screaming all the time, and they yell at you, and it's not as aesthetically pleasing as someone like a Jim Ross or a Gordon Soley who didn't yell at you, they just told you what was going on, or like a Lance Russell who back in the day would just tell you what was going on, and then sort of had this volume control and pace. And I get nervous when I call a wrestling match, like a pro wrestling match, not a
Well, let me say this, Danny, to you, in some of the advice I've gotten, and some certainly others on here can chime in to help you with that point that you made. I would tell you that to have a future in this business, just what I've learned over time, and these are things that I'm challenging myself, is, you want to nail those big calls, those exciting moments. You do not want to be a screamer, though. You don't want to scream.
Yeah, no.
You don't want to be too loud, or as some people say, too hot on your mic. So you really need to work on controlling your volume. And wrestling is a really outlier and abstract announcing example. Jim Ross, play-by-play guy, was great in years, but he learned, I think, over time, he probably did this since the beginning, to channel that emotion, when to get excited. Don't be excited on the fourth basket of the game, or in this case, maybe when the referee gives the other guy the signal to ring the bell, and maybe you get a little bit excited when somebody's trying to tap out or something like that. So as you can tell, I don't have a lot of pro wrestling experience when I'm talking about this, but I think from an announcing perspective, I would suggest trying to tame your calls, especially if you want to progress up the ladder. A lot of the calls that I played for you in the beginning from Kenny Albert today on that vignette I produced were 4 or 5 big calls that he made. He wasn't screaming in any of those calls. So that's
he was just elevated volume a little bit.
Correct. He was a little bit more forceful, elevated a little bit with his pitch, with his diction. I think a lot of times, a lot of younger folks, when they have these big calls, Danny, and others, we tend to go fast because we want to get so much information in. I really believe, especially in the big moments, you can go to the Baptista bat flip moment, one of the calls where where Drew Brees hit a pass to Jimmy Graham for a go-ahead touchdown, the Saints over the 49ers, in one of his playoff broadcasts for Kenny Albert. Less is more. He went slower, gave the nuts and bolts, and got out of the way and let it breathe, which means don't talk. So these are something that folks that want to get into network TV play-by-play are constantly working on. And what I would advise you in any form that you get to broadcast on is channeling those emotions and that excitement.
And I'm sort of a noob at this anyway, so it's
okay. And this is why I host these forums. It doesn't matter if you've never done broadcasting, and if you're a 40-year veteran. I bring everybody on here to come together to learn, and I appreciate your question today.
Thank you for doing this again, Dave, and your energy and your enthusiasm for the business is greatly appreciated.
No, thank you, Dan. I appreciate it. Before I move on to TV play-by-play, is there anybody left on here that has some college radio experience or is a college broadcaster or a radio broadcaster that might want to hit on one or two things that I outlined here? And you can unmute yourself and come on and introduce yourself and say hello. Go ahead, Cam.
Yeah, hey, Dave. Thanks again for setting this up. This has been great. And some of that stuff you were just saying definitely rings true for me. Yeah, I was doing play-by-play at UMass for the basketball team last season. Had a kid make a 70-foot shot at halftime with 0.8 seconds left. We started screaming like crazy. It didn't sound too good afterwards, but it was a learning moment. So definitely know for next time.
What did you learn from that moment after the call, hearing it back?
Well, I think there was something of a problem with the engineer back in the studio a little bit. Our levels were just too high to start. But then, and also just had my color guy kind of jump over me a little bit. It was just so unexpected in the moment that we couldn't hold back our emotion. But I think it's a lot of what you just said, volume, control, and pace. I think, yeah, just slowing down and not overreacting like a fan might be in the stadium, just kind of trying to be professional in the moment and just describing the play more rather than, oh my goodness, freaking out, like telling what happened, what the players are doing in reaction and stuff like that. Just kind of keeping a level head about yourself. But yeah, it was definitely a learning moment.
Who do you look up to on radio, play-by-play? I don't know if you ever catch any Westwood One games or local guys and women in your market that maybe college broadcasters, that guys are, play-by-play for basketball or football. But are there any that are like really smooth on air to you that you've learned from as you build your career?
Well, I think one of the classic ones is Dickie V. I think he's kind of opposite in that way. I don't think he really does have great control or pace, but he kind of gives you that freak out reaction where he's, oh baby, screaming like crazy. I think that can also work in ways if you're a Dickie V and you've been in the business that long. I listen to a lot of 98.5. Those guys do a good job. But yeah, and then I kind of had a question too, if that was all right. Yes. If I could jump in with a question. For me, I felt like I was repetitive a lot in ways like a three, somebody makes a three and I'm saying knocks it down or it's good, or you kind of use the same phrases. I'm wondering if you have any tips on kind of trying to expand the vocabulary. And I don't think for listeners it's something they pick up on as much, but for me, when I'm listening back to myself, I notice it more.
Well, it's a great,
if you had any tips.
Yeah, it's a great question. And anybody else can chime in with any tips they have as well if they want to participate. I think it's okay to listen to other broadcasters and hear their description. And if you have a notepad with you wherever you are, and whether you're in the car, you're at home, wherever, hear how the different men and women calling the games describe some of the plays that you're talking about. I can give you a prime example. I filled in for Villanova radio in 2015 on basketball because the football announcer had to call an FCS Villanova football game. And so they slid me into the basketball booth, which was an awesome experience. I did the Holy War, Villanova St. Joe's for Villanova radio. And doing that game, I went through something probably similar to you. I tried to get highlights, and I found a video highlight of that game, and I was using the same phrase over and over to describe an action like you're saying, like a three-pointer from the wing. It's good, So what I would recommend, and this is just me thinking on the fly here, I think it's okay to write down different phrases that you hear, and there's different if you Google, there's a good SDAA has good platforms that you can look up different vocabulary, descriptions of games, and other broadcasters. If you simply look up descriptions of basketball, football, soccer, I think that will help you. And I'm not trying to, and listen, I'm not trying to say, oh, you have to do what this person does, but I think you'll notice some different phrases to call some things. And lastly, I would say, Cameron, is over time, the more reps you get on air, you're going to come up with different things to say. But I think a lot of it has to do with listening to others and hearing how they broadcast. Even if it's as simple, and some broadcasters do this, as coming to your broadcast with a 3x5 card. And I'm not saying to read it on the air and have it, in addition to your spotting board, but for every made basket, it's good. Yes. Down it goes. Successful. He drains it. Or you lay out if you're on TV. If you can have that sit by you, and it can be a reminder. And I've done that on broadcast. I'll bring reminders maybe more so about smiling more, relaxing, trying to let the analyst shine. I'll come up with some of those tidbits and have them next to me. But don't hesitate to do that and bring it with you, that little cheat sheet, if you will, because all broadcasting, as Kenny Albert said, is an open note test. And it doesn't matter whether you're starting out or you have 10, 15 years in the business. Just my opinion, I think it's okay to bring some of those reminders with you to a broadcast, if that helps.
It does, Dave. Yeah, those are great tips. I appreciate it. No,
you're welcome. Does anybody else have anything to add on Cameron's question about how they mix up their vocabulary or change things on their calls? If you do radio play-by-play, you're welcome to come in and unmute yourself. Going once, going twice. All right, so Cameron, I hopefully that helps and that answers your question. Continued success to you, and thank you for being part of these. And thank you for the kind words.
It does help, and thank you for setting this all up. It means a lot.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. We'll keep doing it. I want to move on to some TV play-by-play nuggets before we close out today's broadcast meeting. And a lot of you on here do radio play-by-play for your college or high school or on internet or for your athletics department or just stream games, BTN Student U, ESPN Plus, ESPN3, or some other independent outlets. So these are some things that I think about when getting ready for a TV play-by-play assignment. The pregame meeting and the talking during the week, Kenny Albert hit on this, producer. A lot of times with the NFL, that crew stays together for, if they do the playoffs, it could be, 18, 19 weeks. If they do the divisional round or a wild card round, where they're talking. And I recommend, you don't just need to do this on TV, really. I recommend talking with, even if they're not your friends, who you're working with on your broadcast leading up into your game, and not just what I said on the radio topic 5 minutes before, saying, this is how we're going to do it. This is how we're going to do the open. This is what I want you to say. I'm going to get it back from you. I'm going to throw to our sideline reporter, and then we're going to start play or go to commercial. Not the way you want to do it. The more organized you can be, meaning talking during the week, and you don't have to be a network TV play-by-play guy or a professional play-by-play announcer on television to do this. I highly recommend communicating with people, and you'd be surprised how many younger people in the business don't do that and how many older people in the business just show up and do their thing. And sometimes, you think like the conversation could be awkward when you make it to maybe the ESPN level or something, but when you're working with an analyst, whether they have 5,000 games under their belt or it's their first broadcast or it's the first time you two are working with each other or the first time you're working with a 3-man-woman combination booth, I highly recommend the communication. When you get onto the ESPN level, some of the tidbits that I can share in some of the ESPN events I've worked or Philadelphia Union games or New York Riptide, play-by-play games on MSG and other things I've worked on is we share graphic and story ideas. Sometimes they'll come organically. You don't need to write a 15-page email to somebody, but it could be one paragraph about some ideas you have for the show. and you'll get to learn. And I think I'm trying to remember if it was Sean McDonough who said this, or Kevin Harlan, or maybe Mike Corey. But I think it was Mike who said some producers you'll learn are ones that will give you the storylines and say, hey, here's how I would like to run the show and how I would like it to go, because I'm hearing from stuff from our coordinating producers back at home base. Or they'll be laissez-faire and say, hey, it's up to the announcers. Give me a couple storylines that you want to discuss during the game. So I think that's important to learn who you're working with and have that open dialogue and communication. I always love asking announcers whether they prefer an open live or tape. Kenny Albert today said that he likes doing it live. I would agree. I think sometimes when it's taped, you want to be so perfect. And a lot of times I've been in scenarios where, whether it's me messing up, the analyst wants to do it over, the studio host wants another crack at it. Sometimes it's better to fight through it live, even if there's a stumble here or there. And when you watch it back, the casual fan is never going to catch it. I highly recommend to those of you that are younger on this call, in college, first job, high school, if you have the opportunity, the capability with your technology to do your opens live and your halftimes live, which I know halftimes pretty much are done live. So maybe we'll leave it with just opens. I would do it that way. It will gear you up for the next level. It will teach you, like Kenny Albert said, to channel your nerves when you get to do a bigger game. And when you hear the music and you give that fist pump, which I often do, and I'm smacking my hands, I'm dancing in the booth. For those that know me personally, I'm a very energetic guy. I like to preach that positivity before a show to not just the announcers, but the men and women behind the scenes in the truck and in the booth with us or on the set. Everybody has a small part to play. And I think that's really important when, especially you're doing a live event where you're not reading from a teleprompter for 2-3 hours and essentially ad-libbing the whole time and seeing or calling the action, what the game gives you guys as the announcers. Practice that live open as much as you can. If you crash and burn, especially when you're younger and there's not a lot of people watching you, you grow from it, you learn, and you get better. Practice it during the week. Do it more efficiently the next time. A lot of cases, I'll get those nerves and butterflies before, and everybody gets them, no matter how many they've done. And Kenny Albert mentioned that today. I think the more times you do it live with an open, you can channel those nerves, and all that nervousness will start to subside over time. I don't need to go too much detail on it being an analyst domain. I think a lot of you know on TV, it's where the analyst shines, and a lot of play-by-play men and women are the traffic cops. They're doing the X's and O's of game calling. One of the big pieces of advice that I could give to you that I've learned about my play-by-play is I think some of the great calls that I can put on a demo tape is when I'm staying on top of the play, not being behind. A couple of the football broadcasts I've done in recent years, like they've been some great calls, but I said, and somebody pointed it out, maybe I was a step or two behind that interception because I waited to make sure I got the identification right, because we know the cardinal sin is getting the player wrong. And in some cases, you need to wait, in particular when you're doing games from the studio and you're only at the liberty of what the cameras show you, and you're not there seeing it with your own eyes. It's okay to scale back. I would just tell you that the advice that I'm getting from network professionals, higher level broadcasters that I can share on this forum to everybody is try to stay on top of the play. Let the analyst shine. You don't necessarily need to make it a question and answer forum, with the exception of if the analyst isn't really giving you enough, then you can maybe prop in some more questions during your broadcast, but you want it to be a natural, organic flow. As Kenny Albert said, he learned the trade through osmosis, was his quote. Feel out the analyst. If you worked with him or her 20 times, you know how they'll broadcast and what their prep will bring to the table. But a lot of times, and really in most cases, it's what the game dictates. When it's a close game, we know you're doing the nuts and bolts of play-by-play at the bitter end. When it's a game that's out of reach, I know you're digging deep into storylines. I love that Kenny said today, one of the things I learned, he maybe has to dig a little bit deeper on the football side because there's cadence and rhythm to it. He does his play. He lays out, lets the analyst come in on the replay. The analyst goes through the 1 or 2 series of cuts that the director puts on the screen, and then the play-by-play gets it back. Or they have a conversation to tag that point. When you get more experience into the field on TV especially, or streamed internet games, you'll find that flow and that balance when it's appropriate to tag, which means to maybe piggyback off of a replay or a point that the analyst, or maybe there's just not enough time, and to go into the next play. Very important. The most fundamental thing is it's an analyst domain. Let the analyst shine. Prepping beyond your game is something that's huge when you get to the national level, I would say, even at the college level. Go beyond your game, which simply means don't just prep for the 2 teams that you're focused on. Prep for a couple storylines that you don't need to go crazy with it, but prep some standings from your conference or the top 25, and maybe put a few nuggets on your board about a couple teams that you think may be weaved into the conversation. When you get to the national level, I can tell you that a lot of the things I hear and see is they want you to talk about national storylines over play. I remember this year the James Wiseman stuff out of Memphis coming out. And, I was doing a Temple broadcast, but Temple plays in the American Conference and so does Memphis. So overplay, and yes, we missed a few baskets. It's okay. TV's a watchable medium. People are viewing the action. We were talking about Memphis's situation and how Penny Hardaway and the staff is handling that, and what James Wiseman is going to do, and what the NCAA is going to do. So I thought that was important, and something that I think you should focus on regardless of the sport or the team that you work for. Working with a producer in your year in the role of a statistician, when you get to the higher levels of play-by-play, one of the best things is working with so many talented men and women that are in your ear. The best producers are the ones that aren't chatty really in your ear. They're walking you through things. They'll show you graphics an hour and a half or an hour before your broadcast. A lot of these things, hopefully, you've seen during the week, shared via email, but they'll tell you when to go to break. Or, hey, after Joe's point here, we're going to go to conference standing. So we're going to go to the first 4 out, according to bracketologist Joe Lenardi, so you can be ready. And you're learning how to hit that button, which is a talkback button on your mic box, or a cough button, how to utilize the talkback button when you're not on the air. And if you don't know what that means, I can go into detail at another time about how to utilize those buttons when you're on some of those bigger shows. It's just awesome being a part of it. If you have a statistician, I would recommend using a lot of the things that they give you, but you don't have to use everything. And the statistician, a good one, will not be upset when you don't say everything that they write down on a card. For those of you that have no idea what I mean by that, they'll give you, there's a man or a woman that could be sitting to the left of the play-by-play person, and they can give you runs in a game, how many points somebody has scored, any milestones that they have prepared. And they'll have their own system about how they do that. Hopefully, you'll talk with your statistician before the broadcast and how they communicate with you non-verbally. But that's really important to utilize that work by the stats person. I recommend, if you are a small college or a college announcer or a first or second job and you don't have a statistician for hire, have a friend do it. I'm sure there's or maybe it's a brother or your dad, somebody that knows how to work, maybe a stats, can bring their iPad, can work the stat system, and can help you. It's one less thing you have to worry about on a broadcast. So if you can get a statistician, even if it's a friend or a loved one, highly recommend it. When you get to the bigger levels of TV and professional sports and at the network level, those are provided to you. This is getting into the nitty-gritty of play-by-play and a huge talking point. And it was cool to hear from Kenny Albert today about when to go through stories and then when to go into the nuts and bolts of play-by-play. He learned over time that, he said, a couple of years in the business that, a lot of announcers try to sound smart because you're proving to your network producers that you want to show them all the prep work you did. Everybody is guilty of that, including myself. But you learn over time to scale back, trust all the prep work you did, understand that you're only going to use 5 to 10% of that material on your broadcast, and that's okay. And when it's timely, you bring in a story. You let it breathe when there's an injury and you know not to read a sponsor. When a kid's at the free throw line, you know that's a time where you're going to get maybe 30, 45 seconds to a minute to go into a story with your analyst or talk about something other than maybe the game, maybe than the X's and O's following the action. When a kid's dribbling up the ball, you can go through, and I'm talking basketball here, you can go through a team story from the season. Temple started out 8-0, but on the recent stretch, they faltered and slid down to 0-4 to start conference play because Aaron McKee, their head coach, said that their interior defense has just been dreadful. I'm making that up on the fly, but you don't need to say on TV, obviously, I think all of you know, here comes Steve dribbling up the ball, Temple in red, all that stuff. I think everybody understands that on here. So learning when to go into the nuts and bolts of play-by-play and stories. I think a couple sports that will help you with that if you have a chance to call. Soccer, which I do at the MLS level, I think everybody knows on here. No instantaneous scoring in soccer, a 0-0 game. I've come to love those type of games, and learning when the ball's in the middle of the park, when to go through some stories, when to let the analyst just go off of what he or she sees on that moment and scale back. Really important to remember when the right time is to do X's and O's of play-by-play versus storytelling. Letting it breathe is really important. I think Joe Buck, Kenny Albert that we've had on here, McDonough, Kevin Harlan, when he's on TV, a lot of these men and women, Beth Mowens, Lisa Byington on the female side, have mastered when to simply shut up. And there's nothing that can be said more than the players, the coaches, the fans celebrating. And if you think you can come up with, especially during those huge moments, if you can think of better words to caption, go for it. But chances are, after there's a walk-off home run and you give your quick call, get out of the way, let the director, and I'm talking on TV here, and the producer cut the show, and let the talented men and women on camera do their thing and show the highs and lows of that particular moment. I think that's something that we all get advice on, that, learning that don't have to talk too much on TV. And a lot of you have wrote to me personally about how do you find that happy medium and when it's too much to talk or when it's too little. And I think when you go back and listen to your games, you'll find that out. And when you do smaller sports and you're in a high school gym and there's nobody talking, it's okay, because you're preparing to build for the future. So sometimes, yes, you may need to give a little bit more when you work smaller jobs. As you progress up the ladder and you get on some TV games or some big internet stream opportunities, less is more when it comes to those calls, and just stop talking after some big moments. A kid hits a three from the corner for SMU. Don't talk. I don't need to say it's good. You see, I stopped myself there. Just let it flow and let the pictures tell the story. Handling a toss or a promo read, Kenny Albert went into that at the end. Being smooth, succinct, reading the card, but also if you can throw in a little personality and some fun into those reads instead of reading a whole paragraph about, Sports Center with Scott Van Pelt is coming up next. And to open up his broadcast, he'll touch on The Last Dance with Michael Jordan. And you can throw in your own flavor and say, if you're a producer, you can talk about this ahead of time. If you can throw it and say, hey, John, I loved when Michael Jordan was rolling quarters with the security guard in the Last Dance episode. All those behind-the-scene moments are great. Can't wait to see Scott's interviews tonight with Jackie McMullen and Stephen A. Smith. So if you can throw in some color into your tosses, when appropriate, and you have to know who you're working with, and I recommend talking those things out beforehand, feel free to do it if you're on the right medium to do so. The same thing with throwing to a sideline reporter. I found that trusting your producer is a big one, making sure that you have that open communication with your producer, to know when they say, hey, go down to Danny, go down to Marissa, go down to Jackie, throw it down to Steve. You don't have to have a confirmation with them. You can simply say, and now down on the floor to Danny. So I think about those moments as well. Less is more when it comes to that, so you don't stutter in those moments when you're throwing or tossing to a reporter. And then finally with TV play-by-play is the communication in-game with the production truck. And that's hitting that talkback button and having that constant dialogue that's not going out over the air. If you hit the talkback, if you don't know what that means, it's simply going into the truck or into the producer's ear or everybody in the truck. Could be the director, could be hearing your TD, your graphics people, and you all can be on the same page. For those that know me and have maybe been to some of my broadcasts, I use the talkback button a lot. And in cases when I'm not sure, and I'll ask maybe the same question 3 or 4 times because maybe the producer didn't hear me or maybe I didn't hear him or her clearly, and I'll make sure they want to go to break at the under 16, or maybe we're staying here. Maybe we're doing a rejoin animation saying, you're watching the ACC on ESPN, presented by Dr. Pepper, and I'll make sure that they're doing these logo flies, even if we already did them. So some of those things I constantly think about, and I'd recommend to everybody having that open dialogue before the game, during, and after. After the game is very important, and I'll end with this, everybody, is reviewing your work, sending it to people that you trust in the business, and sometimes, an announcer may say, hey, I didn't like what you did on this big call, but you thought it was the best call. And that's okay. You should take everybody's opinion that you want to send it to, that you send your work to, and consider what they have to say. You do not certainly have to agree with it. But I highly recommend having communication with, all right, guys, great show tonight. See ya. Some people I know are not your best friends that you're broadcasting with, and that's quite all right. You don't need to be friends with everybody in the business, but maybe simply asking a day or two after the game, even if it's in an email or a text, if you have the number, how do you think it went? What do you think went well? What do you think did not go well? It's something I do, even if it's a simple breakdown an hour or two after a game. I don't really leave my broadcasts right after the game unless I have to run for a particular reason, or you got to catch a flight or a bus or a train, or you just have to drive off. I highly recommend talking with some peers. So that's my close on the TV play-by-play. I'll open it up for just some final thoughts on the things I brought up there. So if anybody has some concluding thoughts that they want to share on some of their analysis, what I brought to the table there, feel free to unmute your mic and introduce yourself to the few of you that are left on the call.
Yeah, hey guys, Steve Eggert here. I do MLB stuff, and I do a lot of broadcast ops for Princeton University, doing replay, camera work, graphic stuff. The one question I was going to ask Kenny, but I didn't get a chance to, was about how it was kind of funny what you just brought up about how hockey guys are simply like hockey guys. They don't really do a whole lot of other sports. But I kind of was going to kind of flip the script a little bit with him, and because when you listen to Kenny and like when you listen to his broadcast, you can tell he's a hockey guy. You can totally tell like the way he calls it, the way he is able to, his word choice. And I feel like one of the best things with him is how he's able to get straight to the point so much quicker through word choice than a lot of other broadcasters. And my question for him was going to be like, does doing the fast-paced hockey broadcast really help you with other sports more than doing other sports as it relates to when you have to all of a sudden do hockey, just because you're starting out really fast and then you're doing it slower and slower and slower given the other sports. And the other thing, like, I think Sean McDonough said it best, like as far as being able to do a broadcast and whenever he's giving some sort of news update or whatever, being able to say anything where he can just stop his point at any given sentence, which I feel like is I feel like being able to just streamline the point and let the game sort of dictate what your message is as the broadcaster, especially with TV. I feel like that's when the broadcasts are best. And I feel like Kenny Albert really I feel like from what we heard with Sean McDonough, really applies to Kenny Albert and the way he calls a game and he calls his broadcast, because I feel like he's one of the more simpler guys, and rarely with hockey, which you don't really see with a lot of broadcasters, is I feel like he's rarely ever behind a play, kind of like what you were alluding to as far as the pacing and timing of it all. So obviously that comes from reps and everything like that and the more opportunities you get, but just the timing and the way he's in rhythm and the word choice, I think the combination of that is really what sets him apart and sets a lot of these guys apart.
You made some awesome points there, Steve. And I apologize that we didn't get to your question. I know he had to run, and I know I was giving some rapid fire stuff at the end, so I do apologize for that. We'll get you in early on the next one. So
that's all good.
As far as your question, and again, it's just an opinion.
No,
your hockey point. I think yes, it is indifferent to see hockey play-by-play guys venture off into other sports. We know in Philadelphia, Jim Jackson does a little bit of Phillies. Nate Gig is obviously with the Flyers. I think just my sense, and anybody on here can agree, disagree, I think it helps you. I think the sad part about the way the business is going, and talking with a lot of people that are coming out of school, everybody wants to do TV play-by-play because I think of several things that are obvious. Maybe the awareness, the fame, the money, just you being seen versus being heard. And maybe some people would say radio is a dying form, which I disagree, especially with the advent of satellite radio. I think everybody's listening to Sirius. And if you don't have one, you're driving in a friend's car, you're listening to that. I think that sharpens your game calling, and the versatility only helps you. I say that on every forum that I go to. Some people say, is it better to be niche versus versatile? I think the more games you call, the more events, the better you are. Down the line, you may be presented the opportunity, hey, you're going to be the play-by-play guy for the Milwaukee Brewers. You might have to give up being the freelance TV guy in New Jersey on your local college games. But I think him being a hockey guy, I think that's helped him, just my opinion, helped a guy like him, and would have helped someone like me if I did hockey play-by-play, staying on top of the play in football. I bet you to him, he maybe would have answered that all the other games are just so much slower and easier to hit those big moments. And on hockey, you just got to stay on top of the action and look at the line changes and make sure you're IDing every player correctly on where it's a shot from the point or a guy jetting in towards the crease. It's a great thing that you brought up there. Anybody else have a comment on what Steve brought up there? No, I think it was a point that that was awesome that you made there about versatile, and you could tell that maybe he's a hockey guy. I think preparing for the interview, I didn't really want to go too deep into the background because I wanted to get to a lot of questions. But his goal in reading up on Kenny Albert was that he wanted to be a hockey announcer first and foremost. That was his first love. And we learned the story with the AHL Skipjacks team and eventually getting on to be the play-by-play guy for the New York Rangers. I believe he was announced in 94, and his first season was 95, 96. He's been there 24 years. I think that has helped him eventually get into the Olympics and all the other sports, obviously the bigger games with NBC. But I believe hockey announcing does help him with all the other events that he does, and I think it would help me. I can tell you doing, last thing I'll say on that, I mentioned the lacrosse gig that I do with the New York Riptide. It's not hockey, but indoor lacrosse has the tenor and rhythm just like an ice hockey game. And if you never did indoor lacrosse, very different than how an outdoor game is played. But it's played inside generally a hockey arena or a stadium, and the floor is put out there, and just how fast it goes, it's just like a hockey call with all the line changes and such. So I think that helps me with a couple of the slower sports I do, like soccer, or even when I do tennis as well, whether that's on-court announcing or play-by-play. Anybody else have any concluding thoughts today on some of the radio TV tidbits you heard from Kenny Albert, or some of the things that I brought up before we close today's session? Nobody. Everybody just wants to stare at my beautiful mug, right? All right. Well, thank you guys for tuning in today. I really appreciate all the time. I thought this was another really enjoyable, insightful call. I love the versatility of the type of voices that we're getting on here. In coming weeks, we may have a few different players on here. What I mean by that is we're definitely going to get some women guests on here. We're going to talk some sports business in recent weeks. We're going to talk with an analyst in the coming weeks. So I hope you'll stay tuned to my social media channels and see when those Zoom broadcast meetings are. You know, we do these once a week, and I look forward to keeping them going. And I will put this one out when it exports online. So hopefully you all or your friends in the business or others can play this for somebody else or send them the link to them for them to learn what Kenny taught us and all of you through your questions or sharing. So really appreciate the time. Continued safety to you all, health, happiness. These times stink, but I think as the hours go by and the days go by, we're getting closer to sports coming back. And I know some leagues have put out their plans already. So I'm excited to see what actually comes to fruition and when we'll get back on the air in our respective fields. With that, have a great rest of your evening, and we'll see you guys next week. Have a good night. Thanks for participating, everybody.